I'm Doug Cunningham. A broad-based coalition of 80 groups are calling on United Parcel Service to end its membership in ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. The Teamsters are part of the coalition of labor, religious, environmental, investor, public interest, civil rights, and public health groups. The Teamsters say the coalition is encouraging UPS to leave ALEC over concerns about the organization's extreme agenda and secretive practices. More than 100 corporations and hundreds of legislators have left ALEC. They include Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Yelp, Yahoo, eBay, AOL, International Paper, Occidental Petroleum, Northrop Grumman, BP, T-Mobile, Shell Oil, and Canadian National Railway. The Teamsters say UPS shouldn't be in ALEC because the organization's secretive practices threaten our democracy. The Teamsters say ALEC's practices are clearly out of line with the corporate culture and ethical standards expected by UPS shareholders and customers. Toll collectors on Chicago's Skyway making an average of $11 an hour could strike soon. Their contract has expired, and Teamsters Local 727 says the toll collectors are taking a strike vote. The Chicago Skyway is a major route out of the city, and a strike could impact Labor Day weekend traffic flow. Local 727 President John Coley says the ball is in management's court. He says either the company can do the right thing and offer a fair agreement, or force the workers to hit the picket lines to fight for fair wages, benefits, and working conditions that they deserve. Now here's Frank Emspak with WIN's news analysis.
The aftermath of Katrina is on many people's minds. So is the aftermath of the stormy stock market. What do they have in common? In the aftermath of Katrina, we find the income gap between the working poor and the wealthy has grown. Positive impacts of the recovery in New Orleans are skewed upwards. The benefits of the stock price recovery, if it continues, are also skewed upwards. But the low wage problem remains. Most workers have not received meaningful wage increases in years, and in fact, increased costs for food, communications, transportation, education have made it impossible for most working families to accumulate wealth. Increasing inequality will not change until the wages in this country are increased substantially and indexed to inflation. This, of course, is a challenge faced by the UAW and the auto negotiations and the Verizon workers and their negotiations. I'm Frank Emspak for Workers Independent News.
The Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from the Bank of Labor, a division of Brotherhood Bank and Trust, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. Union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor offers a business Visa card with no annual fee and points earned with every purchase, along with rental vehicle and travel accident insurance. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
West side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rise on. Oh, and this time is my time. Alright, love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of economic news to talk about. A lot of wage stuff, a lot of trade stuff, a lot of plant closing stuff. If you're a working person in this country, today not going to be a good day. Today not going, but it is one of those days where you're going to go, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, here's a thought. We start looking to each other and going, you know, some stuff's messed up around here. And we need to fix it. And we still have that power of the vote to elect people who aren't completely, bought and paid for by our Wall Street elites. So we'll talk about some of those policies, some of those ideas of how we create that broad-based working class, that prosperous working class again in this country, like our grandparents' generation did. Say what you want about the grandparents. They didn't take you-know-what from anybody. At least my grandparents didn't. And you look at the report that just came out, the news today, a new study out by the National Employment Law Project. They point out that despite all of the reports that we've heard about hiring and the unemployment numbers are down and everything's getting better, just keep believing. Despite all of that and all of the other economic indicators that show that the economy's improving, we think, the sad reality is for far too many of us, far too many working people, the take-home pay not recovering. In fact, what the National Employment Law Project has come out with is they're saying, look, since the recovery in 2009, wages have fallen. The wages for average everyday working folks have fallen. And you don't need a fancy report. You don't need some, well-written, high verbiage document to tell you that the paycheck has shrunk and it hasn't recovered. The other part of this is I would guarantee, not just from the recession forward, I'd guarantee that many workers would argue their incomes have been stagnant and falling for at least 35 years. But that's another report somewhere, I'm certain. This one here by the National Employment Law Project points out that, and I guess not surprisingly, that the declines in wages were for those who had the least amount of bargaining power, for those who were marginally attached to the workforce, for those folks at the very bottom of the economic pool, the lowest paid workers, the people where the jobs are being created. The cleanup after people jobs, the home health care aides, the food prep folks, the folks who, clean the mess up. Also some retailing stuff. But here's the thing. Understand these jobs have always been jobs that have paid low, but they're the ones that are replacing those factory jobs that the working class used to have, those manufacturing jobs that the working class used to have, to earn better wages, better hours, better conditions, all of those things. And you look to yesterday when EPI, the Economic Policy Institute, they released another report that kind of goes hand in hand with this, if you will. And what that report showed was labor productivity has continued to grow. We're being more productive. We're working harder. We're working smarter. We're working better. We're producing more. There's more outcome. There's more output for the time that we put in and the labor that we do. But guess what? No surprise again here. Don't need the fancy report to tell us what we already know, but thank goodness it's here. The benefits of our productivity, of all the working folks' productivity, all gone to either the companies, the shareholders, or the top executives. Not to you and me. Not to the people who actually did the work. And this is the part that blows my mind, because we keep hearing on the right wing, we need to pass these anti-worker, no rights at work bills and all of this paycheck deception and all of this nonsense. Whatever happened to the meritocracy that they told us was their dream utopia, that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, you'd get ahead? What happened to that? And this is where the conservatives lose me, because the rhetoric doesn't meet the reality. This love affair, this fantasy island of the mythical free market where everyone does better, it ain't happening. Not happening. One of the things that the free market does really, really well is it generates massive profits, squeezes every inefficiency out, and accumulates that wealth at the very top. But you know what else it does really, really well? It drives down wages and working conditions and basically slave driver conditions. You want to live in a sweatshop world? Continue down the path that we're going. And I think these two reports kind of lay that out, that the low-wage workforce is getting screwed more than anybody, and that the productivity, the wealth, is being accumulated at the top. You don't need fancy studies to figure that out. We already know it. But what the EPI thing went into, the paper went into, was, look, there was that decoupling that we've talked about on the program 1,000 times already. Up until about 1973, from the end of World War II up until about 1973, there was this hand-in-hand marching, if you will, of as productivity went up, workers' wages went up. Companies did better, workers did better. Everybody did better together. So the more work you did, the more you got paid. It's that mythical, it's that meritocracy we're told that exists, right? If you work hard, you're gonna reap the benefits. You reap what you sow, we're told. Remember that as a kid? So here we are, up until 1973, we're going along hand in hand. Productivity's going up at a nice steady pace. Wages are following. Everybody's doing a little bit better. Everybody's getting better and better and better. Then in 1973, that decouples. And you throw into all of this, all of the right-wing corporate kind of driven groups, the Heritage Foundation, the American Legislative Exchange Council, all of these groups, these conservative think tanks prop up right around this era. It's 1971, 1972, to start pushing these policies of higher tax cuts and more handouts to government, and cut down on the power of those workers and their unions. So you see this decoupling. And wages have deadlined. I mean, they have productivity is continuing to skyrocket. In fact, as they point out, since 1973, the vast majority of working people, their productivity has gone through the roof. But like I said, the wages, nothing. In fact, productivity from 1973 to 2014 grew by more than 72%. Think about this for a second. More than 72%. So come with me. Imagine if your wages, what you're earning right now, would have kept pace with that, and your wages would have gone up 72%. We'd be a much different country, wouldn't we? The sad reality is, over that time period, wages only went up a little over 8%. So who grabbed the rest of that? Well, it's the very well-to-do in this country. So you have this net productivity gain of 1.3%, 1.33% per year, each and every year from 73 to 2014, and a net gain of income of 0.2%. Again, who gathered all of that wealth? Who held on to that wealth? Wasn't you, wasn't me. We know who it is. We're our billionaire investor class. And you stop and you think about, had we had this continually to march along, much different country. And why do we see this decoupling? Well, I would argue it's a bunch of things. One, we pushed women into the workforce, as I agree with some of the right wingers. Two, the technology a little bit. Three, the destruction of unions. This full-fledged hatred of workers being able to organize and take some of that wealth that they're creating. To me, that's the biggest part of it. And it's not surprising that the low-wage workers are the ones who are being screwed. They don't have any bargaining power, which is why you're seeing them organizing finally right now, going, you know what? It's been a couple of decades. We haven't seen any increase in wages. We haven't seen any increase in our standard of living, and things are only getting better. And now, in the era of let's demonize the poor even more, I got to imagine you're fed up, tired, enough. And eventually I have to think that the entire working class of this country, the 65% of us who punch a clock and collect a paycheck at the end of the week, eventually we've got to go, hey, what about us? And if you go back to the report by the National Employment Law Project, folks, virtually every type of job in this country has seen their wages stagnant. And I go back to, the story of myself. More than a quarter of a century ago, I was making $15 an hour throwing boxes on a shipping dock with a healthcare credit and a pension credit. Once I got full-time and did the 3 years progressive steps up to top wage, back then it would have been like 18 and some change. You're talking, late 80s into the early 90s, and you go, well, what are they making today? Are they making more than that today? No, actually, they're making less than that today. And we're not talking any gimmicky tricks or any of that. We're talking dollar for dollar. And that's the scary thing to me. And until we wake up and say no more, I don't see things changing much into the future. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Mark Price, labor economist, Keystone Research Center, going to talk about their new report, The State of Working Pennsylvania. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I say to myself, what a wonderful world.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1928. 300 musicians working in Chicago went on strike against 250 movie theaters. They were protesting their impending replacement by talking pictures. This was part of a nationwide wave of protests by the American Federation of Musicians. The union had amassed $1.5 million to fight laying off musicians who played at the movies. From the inception of cinema, Thomas Edison had hoped to merge sound and film. Since this did not happen in the early days of movies, the films used intertitles and had musical accompaniment. This music ranged from an orchestra in the large urban theaters to a single piano player in smaller theaters. Across the country, 75,000 musicians worked in movie theaters. This live music played an essential role in setting the mood of the film, building dramatic tension, and enhancing the movie-going experience. However, there was considerable difficulty matching other sound to film visuals. Western Electric and Bell Telephone produced the first commercially viable movie sound system. It hooked up a very large phonograph to a film projector. This was first used in the film Don Juan in 1926. But the next year, in October of 1927, the opening of the Al Jolson film The Jazz Singer marked the introduction of the first successful talking picture. Talking pictures were a boom to many comedic vaudevillian performers such as Jack Benny and the Marx Brothers, who could now translate their comedy onto film. As a result, musicians, members of the American Federation of Musicians, were no longer needed to provide musical accompaniment. By the end of 1928, nearly 2,000 theater musicians in the U.S. were unemployed. By 1929, nearly half of the nation's movie theaters had converted to sound. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. Rush Limbaugh has now joined a chorus of Fox News hosts who are declaring that the Black Lives Matter movement, which emerged in the wake of a series of high-profile deaths of African Americans, should be designated a hate group. Groups currently identified as hate groups include the KKK and neo-Nazi groups. Fox and Friends co-host Elizabeth Hasselbeck wondered,
why has the Black Lives Matter movement not been classified yet as a hate group? I mean, how much more has to go in this direction before someone actually labels it as such?
Fox News' Geraldo Rivera tweeted recently that Black Lives Matter is, quote, looking more like a hate group than ever. And on his radio show, Rush Limbaugh claimed,
all this Black Lives Matter, somebody will allege that Black Lives Matter maybe is a hate group or what, and that people erupt. How can you say that? They're a peace-loving protest organization. What do you mean a hate group? Well, I'm just listening to what they say.
But counter to the conservative media's claims, the Black Lives Matter movement actually just aims to shine a spotlight on racial disparities in the U.S. criminal justice system. For more on this and other stories, visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
minimum wage. Yeah!
You know what it means when they pay you minimum wage? You know what they're trying to tell you is like, hey, if I could pay you less, I would.
So do you know where your raises went? Because obviously, as we pointed out from the National Employment Law Project report, the raises did not go to you and me. So where'd they go? I'd argue they went to the folks who can afford the $40,000 headphones. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Wearable technology phones that are now popping up. Jewel grade 3D printing for consumer electronics. Beautiful, beautiful pieces of work, art, all that. I got to wonder if the sound's any good, though. But 40 grand a pop. If you've got that kind of cash to blow around, you're exploiting somebody. Also, if you wanted to impress your girlfriend a little bit, there's only a $15,000 bottle of wine out there. I can't pronounce it, not even going to try, but for 15 grand, you can have a nice little bottle of bubbly. So there you go. How nice. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what's going on here in Pennsylvania. We know nationally that things not going real well. But when 3/4 of the American people are saying, hey, we're on the wrong path, someone, I would think, should listen. But the Keystone Research Center has come out with their State of Working Pennsylvania 2015. Some ideas, some thoughts, maybe some things we could do. Oh, I don't know, make people a little happier, things a little bit better. I don't know. That's why we've asked Mark Price, labor economist over at the Keystone Research Center, to come talk with us. Mark, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, Rick, it's great to be here. And let me lead off with, hey, wine for everybody.
Absolutely. Especially $15,000 wine. And the thing is, I don't even drink, and I would go, wow. That's more than a minimum wage worker makes an entire year. That's someone's entire year's labor in one bottle.
Yeah, I'd have trouble drinking that.
I think I would. I'd be afraid I'd drop it. So, let's talk about what's going on. No budget. I guess day 65, no budget here in Pennsylvania.
And counting.
And counting, and no end kind of in sight.
And cats and dogs. It's pandemonium, chaos. It's terrible. Yes, we have no budget, and this is sort of the big cloud that we see in this year's State of Working Pennsylvania on the horizon. You've been seeing in the news, the stock market's shed of 400 points or 500 points a year. The Chinese stock market's crashing. Stock markets are interesting, especially those people who can afford $15,000 bottles of wine, but they aren't real economy. And the overall economy remains on a path of recovery, right? And it's headed in the right direction. And actually for Pennsylvania, and these are low standards, but for Pennsylvania, job growth is back to normal, is one of the key findings in this year's State of Working Pennsylvania. In the last 12 months, we've had the fastest job growth we've seen in several years.
Good news?
Yeah, very good news to see, although it's, again, just back to normal. So typically in the last, at least since 1990, we've ranked around 35th in terms of when you compare the pace of job growth in Pennsylvania to the rest of the states.
Okay.
And we ranked 34th this July, which is sort of, it's important to remember we're an older state. We don't enjoy the population growth that warmer places do. Places like California and Florida that have January temperatures that are much more comfortable than ours tend to grow faster just because people tend to move there, although they can also end up being poorer and having less public services like better education systems, et cetera. But overall, things are back to normal in Pennsylvania, and yet just our luck, just as they get back to normal, we have this cloud on the horizon, which is the state budget, which hasn't been resolved. And so far, they've been pretty lackadaisical over in the legislature. Governor comes out with a budget proposal in March. Not much of any action happens until very late in June. We get a proposal from the Republicans, which doesn't make any attempt to meet the governor halfway in any of his proposals.
Or anyway.
And naturally a veto happens, and we then
vacation.
Hey, vacation. Harrisburg becomes a practical ghost town. It wasn't up until last week or so that we finally got some give and take suggestions. Where things are moving, but it remains sort of no resolution. And that's a problem for the economy because one of the biggest sectors in Pennsylvania is education. And school districts who rely on a portion of their budgets rely on the state's contribution. And with the state's contribution not being there, they're having to dip in into their reserve funds in order to keep, teachers employed and keep the doors open. But those reserves are going to run down in various districts. And at some point, you're going to be faced with furloughs. And that should be a reminder. We went through this, or a version of this, in 2011. We had deep cuts in the budget that actually led to layoffs in school districts. Our count up to now is that, there are roughly 33,000 jobs lost in education. And that's a huge blow.
That's enormous.
Yeah, it's a huge blow. I mean, if you imagine if that was all in manufacturing, it would hurt the economy. And that's precisely what happened. That's why our job growth slowed. And we're just now recovering from that. And yet here we are with folks in the legislature just taking their time, risking again, some reductions in staff employment at schools for reasons that are, beyond me. But at the end of the day, we're happy to see that job growth is back to normal. That said, I do have some less positive news.
All right, hit me with it.
Yeah, less positive news is basically because the economy has been growing relatively slow, because we hit that rough patch, we're still not back to what we would describe as full employment. And for that purpose, we just basically ask, does everybody who wants a job have a job? And in looking at that estimate, we're thinking that there would be roughly 200,000 more people employed today than there currently are if we were back to full employment. So there's a lot of excess capacity. It would take, at the current pace of job growth, normal job growth, it'd take another 3 or 4 years to make up that gap.
And that's assuming that we don't reproduce.
Exactly.
that's saying that everyone stops doing what they do.
Well, right, and that kids, decide to, take a long vacation to Europe, and not enter the labor market. So it's going to take a bit of time to get back to full employment, and that's a problem because it's only when, in today's environment, and we'll talk about this in more detail. In today's environment, the only way wages go up is when employers find themselves in a situation where they can't recruit workers, or they have difficulty, they don't get enough applications, or they find themselves losing key staff because their staff are getting higher wage offers from other places. That kind of virtuous process doesn't happen as long as we're as far away as we are now from full employment.
Right.
So the bottom line is, if you look at wage trends, since the beginning of the recovery, wages for the bottom 70% of Pennsylvania workers have fallen. And that's over the course of the recovery, so 2009 to 2014. That's a long time. It's a terrible result, and it's a continuation of a pattern where basically, the typical worker in Pennsylvania, their hourly earnings after adjusting for inflation are down about 2% since 2001. They've seen really no wage growth. And one of the things we do in the report this year is contrast that with a better period in economic history for Pennsylvania, and that was 1997 to 2000. Very short window, but in that window, we were much closer to full employment than we are now, and we had really robust job growth. And the bottom line, the typical worker in that little short window saw their hourly earnings rise by 6.6%. I mean, it makes a big difference how tight labor markets are, and when they're weak, as they have been, we don't see very much wage and income growth. And that's, the really bad news here. And so we make some recommendations in the report, some things that policymakers can do. I mean, the first and obvious one, which I'm sure you've talked about on the program, is, the Federal Reserve has very low interest rates right now, and that's intended to, spur economic activity. They're thinking about raising interest rates. And, we're advising the Fed that inflation remains well below normal, even here in Pennsylvania. Full employment, we're not anywhere near it. We want to see some more wage growth, so we need stronger job growth. And so now is not the time to raise interest rates. And that would be something that would go a bit towards helping reverse this problem of falling wages. And then, of course, we have some other recommendations where you directly raise wages for workers, raise the minimum wage, as your opening music pointed out. If you raise the minimum wage to $10.10, you're going to benefit roughly 1.2 million workers, and that's going to pump up the economy, generate some, modest employment growth, and that's a good thing.
Are you sure about that? Because I keep hearing it's the end of the world. I keep hearing that if you did that, Mark, that you would cause more unemployment and everyone would be worse off because of it.
There would be, just pandemonium in the streets if you raise the minimum wage. 29 other states have engaged in this experiment. They have raised their wage. In fact, every neighbor to Pennsylvania has raised their minimum wage. Delaware's went up just last June. Every state in the Northeast, except for us and New Hampshire, has raised the minimum wage. And remarkably, many of the states that have raised their minimum wage, they have much faster job growth than we do.
I wonder why.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm led to believe that since we would be the bottom of the barrel, then all of those states should be losing jobs to us hand over fist. There should be a flood of jobs into Pennsylvania because we're the low wage state now.
You know, people are running here from Ohio, from New Jersey, New York. It's a great thing because you want to serve pizzas in New York from Pennsylvania. These are the stories that you hear, and you hear them all the time, and you very artfully deal with them on your program. Employers will say almost anything to avoid a wage increase, and tell you all sorts of really bad stuff that's going to happen to you if we gave you a boost in your earnings. And the fact is that we have decades of research, careful research, that shows that there are no substantial job losses associated with minimum wage increase. We have just basic data about job growth across the states that places that have raised minimum wage haven't experienced rapid declines in employment. They haven't experienced any of the stuff that folks complain about from the business lobby. So it's a good policy.
It is a good policy, but if you gave people more money, they would just spend it.
Exactly. That's how the economy is supposed to work, right? When people spend money, that creates a job somewhere else in the economy. That's why this is a good thing, not only to raise wages directly through a minimum wage increase, but to get labor markets tighter than they are. When you have a situation where employers are under pressure to raise wages, that means we're all making more money and we're spending that money. Now, sure, you give a minimum wage increase, we're not going to be able to afford a $15,000 bottle of wine. But we are going to be able to afford food for our kids, to be able to take our kids to the movie theater, to do those little extra things that help generate other employment in the rest of the economy. And that's a good thing.
I'm absolutely with you. Give me some other ideas. Besides raising the minimum wage and maybe investing in our infrastructure and all that other stuff, what else should we be doing?
What else we got? Well, one of the things we think would be a good idea is to follow the lead of Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, and the city of Pittsburgh, and adopt an earned sick leave ordinance, basically a law that would extend to workers a certain amount of earned leave over the course of the year for every paid hour.
Wait a second. I thought there was a piece of legislation. No, wait a minute. That was to make it illegal for Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to do it. Never mind. I'm sorry. Wrong side of that coin.
Wrong side of that coin. But there is also legislation to extend statewide. Senator Vincent Hughes has introduced this legislation. We think it's a good idea. And it's in the spirit of boosting wages because, everybody gets sick. It's just not that every worker has access to paid sick leave. And this is a simple way to make sure that people who do get sick, people in particular who serve us our food and take care of us, are the least likely to have earned sick days. So it's a very good policy that will boost earnings for roughly 1 million workers in Pennsylvania if we attempted to enact it for the state as a whole. And of course, we think it's a good idea to leave local governments in the position to, if they want to adopt ordinances that provide more leave than is currently available. I think that's a good thing. It's in the same way we think, a minimum wage bill that passes should include a provision that allows cities like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia to also adopt a higher minimum wage because, frankly, they do have a higher cost of living. And they want to adopt, a higher minimum wage, one that's more appropriate for them than it would be, say, in Lebanon County.
Right, I'm with you. But here's the thing: if you gave people paid sick days, just like the money, if you gave them a higher wage, you just spend it. If you gave them sick days, they just go on vacation.
They'll manage to stay home and not get the rest of us sick. That's exactly what will happen.
And that's probably a good thing.
That's probably a good thing.
Let's bring it back to the budget. I mean, here we are, day 65, no budget. How does this play into the job picture then? I mean, as we pointed out, education is going to take a serious hit if things don't happen. What about the rest of the economy?
No, we think the primary driver here is if you do see furloughs, right? If you do see teachers being told, we don't have the money to pay you, we're going to have to send you home. That's going to affect their spending decisions, and that'll spiral through the rest of the economy. And the local pizza shop won't see as many customers. The local grocery store won't see as many customers. The local auto mechanics, et cetera. And that'll just sort of filter through the rest of the economy and put a real dent, I think, in job growth. Now, I think the one challenge, we don't know when that's going to happen, right? Because every district is in a different financial position. There are some districts that are in really severe straits, don't have Chester Upland, don't have reserves to rely on, don't have a substantial amount of local money available. those districts are going to get hit first, and then there's some more affluent districts that might be able to hold on for a while. But certainly, this can't go on much longer before these effects start to accumulate. And it's important to remember these are not things that are just going to hit the city of Harrisburg, where the state government's located. I mean, these lines run to every community throughout the Commonwealth, because they go directly into school districts, and they're going to start laying people off, and that hurts the local economy.
Either that, or they're going to ask their teachers to work for free, like they're doing in Chester Upland.
They will try that, and that won't work for very long. That is for sure.
Sad stuff. Bark, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the information. Good stuff.
Hey, thank you, Rick. Good to be here.
At least there was a little bit of positive news. Mark Price, labor economist over at the Keystone Research Center. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Here, there's another Rick Smith Show. For working people.
Still open, but man, it's slow. The tip jar's light and the register's low. The bartender don't have much to say. The regular crowd gets thinner each day. Some are maxed out all their credit cards. Some are working 2 jobs and living in cars. Minimum wage won't pay for a roof, won't pay for a drink. If you gotta have proof, just try it yourself, Mr. CEO. See how far $5.15 an hour will go. Take a part-time job at one of your stores. I bet you can't make it here anymore.
We are not moving fast enough.
President Obama makes powerful case for climate action on the edge of the melting Arctic.
Amazing. At one point, we had 4 category hurricanes in the Pacific.
2015 hurricane season has now entered weird, record-breaking territory. Huge news for electric cars. Plus,
the guy saw that mountain when he was one of the first up there and named it after the president. No reason to change it.
Right-wingers apoplectic over renaming of nation's tallest mountain.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You said, oh, Bill Maher, he's going to drag me through the mud. Yeah. First of all, you're in California. It hasn't rained in 4 years. There's no mud. Yeah.
It's true. There's no mud here in California. None. Zero. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, you seem to be quite moved by the president's speech up in the Arctic.
Yeah, it was a very, very powerful speech, and I highly recommend listening to it. He was at the Glacier Conference in Alaska. He called for urgent and aggressive global action on climate change. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. And with that background of melting glaciers and melting permafrost, Obama emphasized the need to act quickly or suffer the consequences.
The Arctic is the leading edge of climate change. It is happening here. It is happening now. And climate change is a trend that affects all trends. Economic trends, security trends, everything will be impacted.
And he was blunt about the consequences of continuing business as usual.
The fact is that climate is changing faster than our efforts to address it. We are not moving fast enough. If we were to abandon our course of action, if we stop trying to build a clean energy economy and reduce carbon pollution, if we do nothing to keep glaciers from melting faster and oceans from rising faster and forests from burning faster and storms from growing stronger, we will condemn our children to a planet beyond their capacity to repair.
The Glacier Conference coincides with the United States taking its turn as leader of the Arctic Council. That's made up of all 8 countries that have territory in the Arctic, including Russia, which is now asserting even more territorial rights. Here in the U.S., environmental groups have called hypocrisy on Obama's approval of offshore oil drilling in the fragile Arctic, which will release even more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
Did the president speak to that apparent contradiction, decrying climate change, even after he's approved drilling in the otherwise pristine Arctic?
No, but Obama administration officials have previously said that their focus is to balance the needs of competing stakeholders, and we still need that oil, so that justifies drilling.
Okay.
Right-wing media, meanwhile, are apoplectic over Obama's announcement to restore the original Native American name to the nation's tallest mountain. Mount McKinley, named for early 20th century President William McKinley, who never actually visited it, was named by a gold prospector, a white guy. McKinley died in office a short time later. Now the mountain will be called what it has been called for thousands of years, Denali.
It's hysterical because Alaska is completely in favor of this. The only ones who seem to be furious about it are the right-wingers and the folks from Ohio, including Republican Senator Rob Portman, who said the mountain was named for President McKinley out of respect following his assassination. Newsflash for Republican U.S. Senator from Ohio, Rob Portman: the mountain was named Mount McKinley years before McKinley was killed.
Meanwhile, for the first time in recorded history, on Saturday, there were a record 3 simultaneous typhoons, all Category 4, churning in the eastern and central Pacific Ocean. Just to keep that in perspective, until this year, there had been only 3 hurricanes total in that region since 1950. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced that the Pacific Ocean is currently warmer than it has ever been in recorded history. And over in the Atlantic Ocean, newly formed Hurricane Fred is the farthest east a hurricane has ever formed off the coast of Africa, and it has generated the first ever hurricane warning for the Cape Verde Islands. The first ever in history. Finally, big news for the car industry. Electric car maker Tesla has again achieved the highest possible rating from Consumer Reports, 103 on a 100-point scale, the only car ever to do so. And BMW has announced that it is going all electric. Within 10 years, it will build only electric plug-in hybrid cars, converting its entire fleet in anticipation of stricter carbon emissions laws as the world transitions to clean energy.
Every BMW will be electric or hybrid in one way or another.
Yep.
In 10 years.
Yep, it's happening.
It's happening. For much more on all of these stories today and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
It is happening here. It is happening now.
Right here, right now. Watching the world wake up from history. Right here, right now. There is no other place I want to be.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists bound to lose?
Interesting little bit on the paid sick days. Kind of just skipped my mind. When I think it was Seth Grove, the Republican, who put forth the legislation that would make it illegal for local communities. The people who don't believe in big government, the people who don't believe in big centralized, overpowering government, those Republicans. He proposed a piece of legislation saying that Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, any local municipality, community, whatever, they couldn't pass paid sick days in their local community. He actually wanted to put, and I think it's still banging around over there in the General Assembly, but to wrestle local control away. Much like they did back in, I think it was 2006 when they passed the minimum wage back then up to $7.15. What the Republicans wanted out of it was that they'd raise it to $7.15, but in order to get that through, the Democrats had to give up the ability for local communities to raise the wage themselves, which means they had to centralize power, which was, even then I was going, I thought this is what Republicans believed in, local control. Because you get with that whole states' rights stuff. What about local rights stuff? Oh, we don't believe in that. No, can't have it. No. Interesting story today out of New York City. Evidently in New York, and not just New York City has a commission on human rights. And what has been passed, as I understand it, is local law ordinance number 37, which in the city there, if I've talked to people who've been in this situation where they've gone for job interviews, and the first thing that's plopped down in front of them is a fingerprint form to do a background check of their criminal record, and a signature form for them to do a credit background check. Now, I know people who have, they've had some problems. Be it, divorce that went awry, be it identity theft, be it medical bills, or just hit a rough patch. And their credit rating, wasn't great. And they never got the jobs, and they never understood why until a couple years ago. They finally realized that employers weren't hiring people under a certain credit score. Well, what they've done now in New York City, the Commission on Human Rights has passed this law that says you can't run a credit check on employees anymore. Not going to happen. And they say if an employer asks you to sign a document so it can check your credit, it's breaking the law. And they also say that employers can't use consumer reporting agencies. They can't use third-party companies, services, any of those websites, any of that stuff to get your credit history. None of that. They can't ask you about your payment history. They can't ask you about your credit worthiness, credit standing, whatever, however you want to phrase it, they can't do it. Credit cards, child support, any of that stuff. They cannot as a matter of law. And that applies to, some of them get around it by saying, well, you're hired, but now we want all this information. Well, that's illegal too in New York City. And they're saying that your credit rating, whatever it is, your credit period, cannot be used any way, shape, or form to fire you, not hire you, or not promote you. That's in New York City. Now, everywhere else in the continental and, the entire U.S., they can. And this is one of those things where you go, at some point, do we start talking about this? Because, what's happened is we've given so much power to these big corporations. We've given them so much that they can do whatever they want. I remember back years and years ago, they had just passed the lie detector thing that an employer couldn't make you take a lie detector test pre-employment. Now, if you're involved in a crime or you're involved in something, they have some powers to compel you to take a lie detector test. But as a matter of employment, they weren't allowed. And I remember I went to this one place, and the guy said, well, before, would you have a problem with taking a lie detector test? And I said, no, personally, I wouldn't, because I've got nothing to hide. But I find it egregious that you're breaking the law. Because at that point, I go, this is somebody I don't want to work for. But we've given these people that kind of power where, they just do whatever they want, and it takes someone to hold them accountable. And I made a report, and nothing ever really came out of it, which is why you need to have strong oversight. And what they're saying in New York City is that they're going to actually put some enforcement behind this. If you're in New York City, you call the Human Rights Commission there at I guess 311, and they said that they'll help people recover lost wages, damages, and they can fine employers for breaking the law. Personally, I think we should be allowed to lock them up. Break the law, go to jail. Same thing that would happen to you or me. Look, they want to be people. Corporations want to be people. We should be locking them up too. What do you think? I'd be interested in your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Future plans, they saw the food was everything to man. Maybe then they had a thought to help the poorest folks, but it only brought more money to their hands. And the more keep getting poorer, people turn away, not able to admit the way they planned. Taking all the soul away from everything they grew, and they can't have the legs on which to stand.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
Meet Scott Walker, corporate whore. The Wisconsin governor says he should be America's president because he's a proven budget whacker who, by gollies, has dressed down teachers, slashed funding for higher education, busted unions, and gone after welfare recipients. He's the Koch brothers' favorite because he's tough on government moochers, unless, of course, you're a corporate moocher. If a corporation wants public money, well, then Walker's your go-to Wisconsin whore. Wesley Edens could vouch for the governor's willingness to bestow public favors on big men with big money. Edens is a New York City hedge fund gazillionaire who bought the Milwaukee Bucks pro basketball team last year. Showing the usual ethical perversity that afflicts private enterprise sports owners, this flim-flamming carpetbagger immediately demanded a $250 million subsidy from Wisconsin and Milwaukee taxpayers to build a sparkling new sports palace for him. Oh, golly, Scott squealed with unseemly delight. It would be my exquisite pleasure to ramrod the deal through my Republican legislature for you. And I'll also schmooze secretly with Democratic officials of Milwaukee County to get them to put out for you. Edens did his part to consummate this back-alley affair by doling out ownership shares of his basketball team to prominent Republicans, including John Hams, a developer who just happens to be co-chairman of the National Finance Committee for Walker's presidential run. This is Jim Hightower saying, sure enough, in mid-August, the beady-eyed governor signed this $250 million giveaway of public money into law. Compounding his sleaziness is the fact that only 1 month earlier, Walker had slashed $250 million from the budget of the University of Wisconsin. So, if you're keeping score on Scott, corporations get the gold mine, students get the shaft.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
We have struggled, we have prayed, we're still searching for something more. We have struggled, we still pray, we're looking for the chance to be free.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. You know, our electoral politics, they've become the latest game for the royalty class. And no more apparent than the report that's come out from the Center for Responsive Politics, who points out that the political 1% of 1%, just about 32,000 people in this country, during the 2014 congressional elections gave about $1.2 billion, or close to 30% of all campaign contributions. That is up from 25% in 2012 and up from the 21% in 2010. You could make the argument that, look, you know, either they're spending more or everybody else is broke and spending less, but they're the ones who are fueling the direction of our policy. And you look at the Donald as a perfect example of royalty wanting the political process. And today, you know, and I've got a kind of an interesting take on this. The Donald today signed the loyalty pledge. I didn't think he was going to do it. I didn't think he would allow his ego to be harnessed in one of these idiotic pledges, if you will. But he has pledged that he will, whoever the nominee is, he will support the Republican Party's nominee and not pursue a third party bid. And Trump was kind of the guy they were all worried about, kind of the next Ross Perot, if you will. But by signing this, you know, he's now kind of taken, I think, a little bit of that fear away. And my take on it is look, Trump is a major brand. He really is. In fact, in his financial disclosure to the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, he valued his name, the brand of his name, at about $3.3 billion, or about half of his wealth. His wealth is half just his name, because he's got his name all over everything. He's a brand of everything, clothing lines, you name it, he has slapped, and masterfully. Give him credit where credit is due. Good businessman. A flamboyant businessman, someone who's going to take center stage, and you got to give him credit for that. But here's the part where you got to go, smart businessman knows a third party run has got to hurt that brand a little bit, because now you're narrowing down to the fringe. And Trump's never been a guy about the fringe. Trump's been about how much money can I get? So to me, when you look at this, you know, if you're buying stock in Donald Trump, I would have argued yesterday you might want to consider, you know, selling to find out where he goes, because I think if he ran on the third party, he would obviously lose, and that brand would lose. So I see this kind of as this is an economic move. This is the Trump going, well, you know what? It's fun to be bombastic. It's fun to go out here and say all these crazy things and do all this, and it's fun to feed the ego. But at the end of the day, he's still a businessman who's got to think about, hey, what happens to that brand? What happens to that name that he's built that, you know, is all over New York City, for instance? There are buildings all over the place with the Trump name on it. And even when we were down in Florida, I mean, there are buildings, the Trump name is everywhere. And you look at this and you got to kind of go, you know, this isn't about loyalty to the party, because the reality is Trump on a number of levels, outside of the idiotic statements and the pandering, I mean, because he's really trying to pander to the religion. I love the Bible. I can't tell you anything in it, but I love it, just because I know that my advisors are telling me we've got to at least quell the thumpers. We at least got to quell that segment who only vote on religious issues. And, you know, somebody says, oh, he loves the Bible. He can't say anything about it, but he loves it. So I look at all of this insanity and go, it's, you know, this is reality TV turned politics. And you've got the hand-picked billionaire candidates. I mean, Scott Walker, I mean, the Koch brothers have got to be losing their mind, because they've got a bunch tied up into him. And he is very one-dimensional. His dimension, go after workers. That doesn't really play. What I find interesting about Trump, though, and maybe this is one of those moments where the electorate doesn't care about policy. I'm a policy wonk. I want to know what you're going to do. I want to know how you plan on getting there. And in the real world of dealing with a divided government, how do you plan on getting there? Trump's not burdening himself with any of the policy stuff. He's just walking out there, just attack mode. And I guess if you look at the Republican side of the field, that's what they want. They don't care about compromise. They don't care about policy. They believe in invisible things. They believe in the invisible man and the free market, where the hand is going to guide everything. So it's not surprising to me. What has kind of surprised me a little bit is that Ben Carson, and I guess this shouldn't surprise me either, that Ben Carson has had a jump in the polls, even though no one can tell you what he stands for. Which, again, funny, but sad. You know, I've had a number of conversations with people go, oh, I like Ben Carson. I go, what do you like about him? Oh, he was a surgeon. I go, yeah, that's a good thing. If I ever my kids needed surgery, Ben Carson would be the guy I'd go to. Brilliant doctor, brilliant mind. But if I want public policy, I don't think Ben Carson's the guy I'm going to. And it's kind of just twisted. But I guess that's what our politics have turned into, haven't they? It just kind of turned into this ridiculousness. I did see a public policy polling numbers out today that gave Ben Carson really good favorability numbers, 41%, while his unfavorables were the best. Only 30% of people had an unfavorable opinion of him. And I would argue it's because they don't know him. Interesting. Let's take a quick break. Looking forward to the September 16th debate, I'll tell you that. Right back. Stick around.
All of my life I've searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me.
I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. A broad-based coalition of 80 groups are calling on United Parcel Service to end its membership in ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. The Teamsters are part of the coalition of labor, religious, environmental, investor, public interest, civil rights, and public health groups. The Teamsters say the coalition is encouraging UPS to leave ALEC over concerns about the organization's extreme agenda and secretive practices. More than 100 corporations and hundreds of legislators have left ALEC. They include Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Yelp, Yahoo, eBay, AOL, International Paper, Occidental Petroleum, Northrop Grumman, BP, T-Mobile, Shell Oil, and Canadian National Railway. The Teamsters say UPS shouldn't be in ALEC because the organization's secretive practices threaten our democracy. The Teamsters say ALEC's practices are clearly out of line with the corporate culture and ethical standards expected by UPS shareholders and customers. Toll collectors on Chicago's Skyway making an average of $11 an hour could strike soon. Their contract has expired, and Teamsters Local 727 says the toll collectors are taking a strike vote. The Chicago Skyway is a major route out of the city, and a strike could impact Labor Day weekend traffic flow. Local 727 President John Coley says the ball is in management's court. He says either the company can do the right thing and offer a fair agreement, or force the workers to hit the picket lines to fight for fair wages, benefits, and working conditions that they deserve. Now here's Frank Emspak with WIN's news analysis.
The aftermath of Katrina is on many people's minds. So is the aftermath of the stormy stock market. What do they have in common? In the aftermath of Katrina, we find the income gap between the working poor and the wealthy has grown. Positive impacts of the recovery in New Orleans are skewed upwards. The benefits of the stock price recovery, if it continues, are also skewed upwards. But the low wage problem remains. Most workers have not received meaningful wage increases in years, and in fact, increased costs for food, communications, transportation, education have made it impossible for most working families to accumulate wealth. Increasing inequality will not change until the wages in this country are increased substantially and indexed to inflation. This, of course, is the challenge faced by the UAW and the auto negotiations and the Verizon workers in their negotiations. I'm Frank Emspak for Workers Independent News.
The Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from the Bank of Labor, a division of Brotherhood Bank and Trust, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. Union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor offers a business Visa card with no annual fee and points earned with every purchase, along with rental vehicle and travel accident insurance. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Standing up to conservatives and corporatists every weeknight. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm the innocent bystander. Somehow I got stuck.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So, over the last couple of days, gotten a few emails from folks going, what's going on in Greece? You talked about it a couple of months ago and all of that, and haven't heard anything back. And the last I heard about what's going on, there is the Greek prime minister resigned and then called for a new election. And at the time that I heard he had resigned, his popularity was pretty high. In demanding a new election, thought maybe possibly he was going to be reelected. It looks like that's tightened up a little bit. But I thought it'd be a good idea, maybe get a little bit of background and see how that affects, the Euro area and maybe how it affects us, which is why I've asked economist and professor of economics over at Bucknell University, Matías Vernengo, to come back. Again, he's also a blogger, got a fantastic blog. nakedkeynesianism.blogspot.com is the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Matías, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I look at this and, I see this, the prime minister resigns, and my first thought is, chaos. Why is the guy heading out of Dodge? I guess that wasn't the reason, was it?
No, well, there was a calculation, and many people thought that this was likely to happen. The reason being that he was, as you remember, and we discussed in the previous shows, he had made the referendum in early July. The referendum had a resounding no vote for austerity policies. More than 60% of the Greeks voted against the agreement. He went and negotiated and was, defeated. One may say surrendered. Whether he had some space for a better deal is difficult to gauge. But at any rate, he accepted a more draconian adjustment program that was originally on the table. And so clearly, with that coming back, the Greek people were still very favorable in their views of Tsipras as the prime minister, because they knew that he was being blackmailed, that he wasn't responsible, that it was the European powers that be that were behind that sort of draconian austerity program.
Right.
And so it was clear that he had political capital, but he had to enforce basically this terrible program, and he was facing also an internal reaction from members of his party. So 25 members of Syriza left the party, created a new party called Popular Unity that is now also running for election, but on a ticket for leaving the euro, for Brexit, basically. And so he was dealing with those issues, and so the normal thing was or reasonable thing to do would be to call elections, which are fairly fast in Greece, and take the advantage of this political capital he had in order to win the election, and basically not having to enforce these policies without a mandate, so to speak. So that was the reason behind it. Now it seems that his political capital has eroded pretty fast. So the last poll shows that they're basically tied and slightly behind, and they've been falling and falling. So the momentum is with New Democracy, with the old center-right sort of party, the one that was in power before Tsipras was in power, before Syriza, and that has pursued all of this austerity policies. The old prime minister, Anthony Samaras, is behind all of this in a sense. So things look bleak, I would say.
Yeah, so let me get this straight then, Matías, because the way I got it is the guy who resigned, he was in favor of not pursuing the austerity policies and making the banks and some of the creditors take a haircut in order to solve some of the debt problems. Popular people, I think that's a good idea. Now he's kind of fallen, and the people who want to bring austerity back, they've risen. Is that how I'm getting this?
Yes, essentially, that's what's happening. Mind you, I mean, we're talking of Syriza, the Tsipras, the guy that just resigned. He has around 25% of the vote, if the polls are correct. So a quarter of people will, which is slightly less of what they got when they got elected at the beginning of the year in January, which was 30-something%. So he has lost some, but not completely. The right-wing party has around 25%. All the other parties, which were scattered, this is almost like the GOPs, they have lots of parties.
Right.
And so all of the others have around 5% or less. So the third, I should want to say, which is in the last poll, the third one, which is sort of concerning, is Golden Dawn, the fascist party, the right-wing anti-immigration, anti-Euro too party. So they have around 5.5% of the vote. The old Socialist Party has less than that. It's in fourth place. So the old Socialist Party and Papandreou, his father was also a prime minister, so a long tradition in Greece of socialist government. They have less than 5%. So that's and the break off of Syriza has even less. The Popular Unity has around 4.5%. So it's very divided, and so it's not like the majority of people want the return of the right wing pro austerity, but they might, in a fragmented situation, win and be able to form a coalition government. So that's very likely, I would say.
Wow, because the people, the working people, are the ones who are going to suffer in this, and it's amazing to me that you would have that kind of support for a group that you're going to know is going to bring you those kind of policies.
Yeah, it's surprising, but it's in the. I suppose it's part of what the European. So the European Union, when the Commission and the IMF and the central bank, the European Central Bank, the so-called Troika, I think that to some extent when they were very hard in the negotiations with Syriza, and they didn't really try to, although it was very clear that austerity had failed, to make an effort to change policies. What they were trying to do is bring Syriza down. So it was to basically send a signal to other places in Europe, in Spain with Podemos, in Italy, and so on and so forth. Send a signal that alternatives are not possible. So this is it. You stick with the program.
Yeah, the
And
Tina
if you
mentality.
try to do something different, we'll bring you down. So I think that's the sort of dynamics. It will be sad if that actually occurs. But mind you, if Syriza wins, it's not that it's everything in the clear. So they basically committed to support a program of austerity, which is a terrible program that will make things worse and will bring. I mean, last year apparently Greece grew a little bit. So even though overall since the crisis began, the GDP has fallen by more than a quarter.
Right.
They're probably already in a recession, and this will throw them into a worse recession. And there's no end in now in this scenario. So it's a tragic situation either way. Of course, it's worse, if you bring back the people that created all of these problems.
Yeah, which is amazing to me that you would even consider that. And I remember, maybe you're the economist guy here. I remember the IMF not too long ago came out with a report basically saying that their austerity plan had harmed Greece, and it was actually did worse than they thought it was going to do, because the cuts they made were so bad that it made things actually worse. Or am I remembering that not wrong?
No, absolutely correct. They went even a step further. They said that the Greek debt is unsustainable in the current sort of path, and that it was a big haircut, so was needed, so that ultimately Greece cannot pay under the current conditions, and things have to change. So the IMF, I should say, has been in the back seat on this. So the IMF has not been, in terms of the Troika, by far has not been the worst, and the same for the ECB, I should say. In terms of who has been the worst, it's clearly the European Commission and the finance ministers within the European Union, and in particular Schäuble, the German finance minister, who said also that he wanted to basically expel Greece from the euro. So that's why I suggested that it's not really Grexit, as everybody says, it's expulsion. So they're being expelled from the European Union. That's also, I think it's a relatively strong sort of sentiment within many of the members of the European Commission. So,
do you see that? Is that where this is going to go?
I think it's not impossible. I mean, there is, at some point, there is a limit of how much austerity you can take and how much collapse of an economy one can take. We're in the 6th, 7th year of this in Greece. This already is worse than the Great Depression. There is a limit to what the Greek people can support this kind of thing. So I think at the end of the day, if they keep pushing this stuff, eventually the question is how fast and under which conditions. But without any change, it seems unavoidable that Greece will have to leave the euro.
Yeah. So then, if they don't leave the euro, and I guess the first question is, what happens to them if they're out of the euro? Are they then ostracized completely? What advantages, what disadvantages do they have being outside of the euro? Because I can't imagine us just saying, you know what, Mississippi or Alabama, you're not pulling your weight, off on your own. I can't imagine what that looks like.
It's certainly complicated. It's not as complicated as getting, Texans do once in a while say that they want to leave the country.
Right.
But you're right. That's it's not the same, and the consequences are here is unthinkable. Whereas I think in Europe it's increasingly reasonable to think about that, and there are obviously pros and cons. The thing is not. I wouldn't be direct, it's a solution for all the problems. So it's not panacea. So they'll have problems. They still have the problem that as soon as they're out of the euro, they still have to pay the debt. A good chunk of that will be devalued if they transform the debt into drachmas. That's for sure. But they still have that, and they still have, more importantly, to import a lot of the goods and services they consume. And for that, they'll need dollars and euros. And so they still have a problem in that respect. On the other hand, they will be able to start thinking about solutions. So some of the incredibly crazy, austere policies of cutting pensions, and helping old people, or paying, social transfers to those that need the most, including food security programs, so that people do not go hungry, particularly children, that they pay for education. Those things will be able, they'll be able to do. So they'll be forced to cut certain types of imports, and there'll be lots of restrictions, and it's going to be hard, but they'll be able to make decisions about how they spend their money in more equitable ways, and to alleviate the suffering of lots of people that are unemployed and retired and don't make ends meet. So that will be feasible. So it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be immediately good. It's going to be still terrible and very difficult. But it seems that at least the Greeks can try to make things better, whereas there's a complete lack of flexibility within the European system, and there seems to be no intention of making the changes that are necessary to improve the situation within the euro.
Right. Yeah. Here's the thing that surprises me, Matías. I mean, Germany has taken a really hard line on this, and given their history, you would think, this kind of a stance and being forced to repay debt and all that would be something that the Germans might understand a little bit better than anyone else.
You're right. Germany, Germany is probably the biggest beneficiary of debt haircuts of the 20th century, both after the Depression, so when Hitler was in power, and also later on in the 50s, after the process of reconstruction had started, and then Germany was divided. So Germany benefited from all of those things. But on the other hand, memory can be short, and you have to understand that this is all happening also in Europe. But one should say, and not forget, the context in which all of this is going on is one in which there's lots of fear about the global economy. Germany is not growing fast, in which Germany is of the countries within the European Union receiving the largest amount of refugees from the Middle East and North Africa, and a huge crisis caused by several factors, but one of those being American intervention in that part of the world, and things that resonate here too. So when workers think, immigrants might reduce my wages and whatnot, and so those things have been used by elites and corporations to weaken and to divide the labor class willingness to fight for higher wages, better conditions, and so on and so forth. So all of that is going on in Germany too. So the labor class in Germany might be not unreasonably frightened too of what happens if we do a bailout to Greece. I think those are unfounded, you see. But the point is, those fears are being played.
Right. No, I mean, you're right.
They don't have higher wages. They don't have very high rates of growth. So the situation is not rosy. So they're afraid.
Yeah, but you would think, though, Matías, that if they're in that kind of a trouble, it'd be a great opportunity for those other countries to invest heavily into that area and make a bigger return out of taking advantage of how far down they actually are.
Sure, no, I agree with you. I mean, this is irrational. So at the end of the day, this is very irrational, and certainly the Germans, and not just the Germans, one should say a good chunk of, what we just said, a good chunk of the Greeks are going to vote for this, a good chunk of the Greeks that are going to vote for that are certainly the upper middle class and the elites are going to vote for this. And so while they see their country collapsing in with their own eyes, so it's irrational, but
right.
But it's I suppose part of human institutions. Yeah.
Good point. Last question I've got you. If all of a sudden you're the prime minister, which way do you personally go?
I'll tell you the truth. At this point, it seems to me very, very unlikely that there is any. So it seems that waiting is just going to make things worse. So I probably would go with popular unity, on a platform of managed exit. Again, not because I think it's a good solution. It's because it seems it's the only solution.
Yeah, interesting. It'll be interesting to follow this, and as it continues down the road, we'd love to have you come back and keep us up to date as this goes down the road.
For sure.
Matías, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
Again, you can take a look at the website at nakedkeynesian.blogspot.com. We've got a link at the ricksmithshow.com. Just click on Matías' name. It'll take you right there. Really some great stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
Just go me one
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1928. 300 musicians working in Chicago went on strike against 250 movie theaters. They were protesting their impending replacement by talking pictures. This was part of a nationwide wave of protests by the American Federation of Musicians. The union had amassed $1.5 million to fight laying off musicians who played at the movies. From the inception of cinema, Thomas Edison had hoped to merge sound and film. Since this did not happen in the early days of movies, the films used intertitles and had musical accompaniment. This music ranged from an orchestra in the large urban theaters to a single piano player in smaller theaters. Across the country, 75,000 musicians worked in movie theaters. This live music played an essential role in setting the mood of the film, building dramatic tension, and enhancing the movie-going experience. However, there was considerable difficulty matching other sound to film visuals. Western Electric and Bell Telephone produced the first commercially viable movie sound system. It hooked up a very large phonograph to a film projector. This was first used in the film Don Juan in 1926. But the next year, in October of 1927, the opening of the Al Jolson film The Jazz Singer marked the introduction of the first successful talking picture. Talking pictures were a boom to many comedic vaudevillian performers such as Jack Benny and the Marx Brothers, who could now translate their comedy onto film. As a result, musicians, members of the American Federation of Musicians, were no longer needed to provide musical accompaniment. By the end of 1928, nearly 2,000 theater musicians in the U.S. were unemployed. By 1929, nearly half of the nation's movie theaters had converted to sound. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about a third-party movement sparked by the disappearance of William Morgan, known as the Anti-Masonic Party. The Morgan incident occurred while John Quincy Adams was president. Adams had defeated Andrew Jackson in 1824, but everyone knew Jackson would run again in 1828. So Adams' supporters took advantage of the fact that Jackson was himself a high-ranking Mason. Adams' supporters used the strong anti-Masonic feelings to create a new party in opposition to the rising Jacksonian Democrats. The new anti-Masonic party proved surprisingly strong in the 1828 elections, but Andrew Jackson won, and most of the anti-Masonic local candidates were defeated. The party then expanded its concerns by supporting internal improvements and a protective tariff. Join us again for the final legacy of the nation's first third party. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
So Zed Jelani over at Alternet's got a piece out that I find very interesting, especially when you look at what's going on in Greece and the austerity, and you look at what's going on with wage stagnation. You look at all this downward pressure on people's standard of living. He points out that evidently there's a new book out that in America, it's called On $2 a Day or $2 a Day Living on Almost Nothing in America. And Zed points out that in the U.S., there are about 1.5 million households and about 3 million children that are living in such desperate economic conditions that they're existing on less than $2 a day. Think about that for a second. That here in the U.S., that's not, Greece, that's not Ethiopia, that's not some far off, far-flung country. That's right here in our backyard. And according to the research of one of the women who wrote the book, and again, the book is called $2 a Day Living on Almost Nothing in America, they point out that in Sierra Leone, over 82% of the citizens there are living on less than $2 a day. And you think about it, that's where you would expect to see it, but you wouldn't expect to see it here. Now, as she points out in the book, and her name's Kathleen Eden, she's a co-writer along with H. Luke Schaefer. According to her research, you got and this goes back to my disdain for the Clinton era. You're looking at 1.5 million people, 3 million children, that has doubled since 1996. And as she points out, that in 1996 you had the welfare reform that did away with aid to dependent children, the ADC. And they came up with this temporary aid for needy families, or TANF, as it's now called. And instead of having a permanent safety net that guaranteed everyone had something under their feet so that they weren't living in extreme poverty, you now have this TANF thing, which is meager, and it's temporary. And according to the two authors of the book, in 2012, only a quarter of poor families in this country received the TANF benefits. And that's down more than 2/3 from 1996. Think about this for a second, because we keep hearing this frame. We hear it often. All these people on welfare and all these lazy people won't get jobs. 47% of the people don't pay federal taxes. All this insanity. Yet, you go back, the ADC programs, of which when I was a kid, my mother and I were on at certain portions almost every year as a kid. She'd get a job for last hired, first fired. As soon as time slowed down, laid off. Now what do you do? And I look at this and go, at some point we've got to be talking about what do you do with people who for one reason or another, be it their demographic, be it their geography, be it their education level, be it whatever, are just not going to be wealthy people. And they're going to be at the fringes. They're going to be at the margins. And what do you do with them? I look at Appalachia. We drove through parts of Appalachia. The reality, poverty as far as the eye can see. You cannot blame the people there, other than saying, well, you should leave. And you go, okay, well, with what money? How do we get out? And where do you go? There's nothing there. There's no industry. There's nothing there. And the little bit of industry that they do have, the wealth is being stolen away. I look at the mining industries. The extraction industries did create a couple of jobs, but the wealth was extracted. And as Schaefer, the author, points out, that you look at Appalachia, where her interviews found that a good majority of the families didn't even know what TANF was, let alone how you apply for it. This is what we've done. And we've hidden the poor. We tuck them away in urban centers or in rural areas, and we leave them in their little, no, don't worry about that. because we're focused on Wall Street. We're focused on our corporate class, our elites. Telling you something wrong with it. But I'm going to check out this book, $2 a day, Living in America on Almost Nothing. I got to take a look at that. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, the big news of the day. You're not going to want to miss this story. It is the news. It's consumed all of the oxygen in the air. We'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
We are not moving fast enough.
President Obama makes powerful case for climate action on the edge of the melting Arctic.
Amazing. At one point, we had four category hurricanes in the Pacific.
2015 hurricane season has now entered weird, record-breaking territory. Huge news for electric cars. Plus,
The guy saw that mountain when he was one of the first up there and named it after the president. No reason to change it.
right-wingers apoplectic over renaming of nation's tallest mountain.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You said, oh, Bill Maher, he's going to drag me through the mud. Yeah. First of all, you're in California. It hasn't rained in 4 years. There's no mud. Yeah.
It's true. There's no mud here in California. None. Zero. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, you seem to be quite moved by the president's speech up in the Arctic.
Yeah, it was a very, very powerful speech, and I highly recommend listening to it. He was at the Glacier Conference in Alaska. He called for urgent and aggressive global action on climate change. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. And with that background of melting glaciers and melting permafrost, Obama emphasized the need to act quickly or suffer the consequences.
The Arctic is the leading edge of climate change. It is happening here. It is happening now. And climate change is a trend that affects all trends. Economic trends, security trends, everything will be impacted.
And he was blunt about the consequences of continuing business as usual.
The fact is that climate is changing faster than our efforts to address it. We are not moving fast enough. If we were to abandon our course of action, if we stop trying to build a clean energy economy and reduce carbon pollution, if we do nothing to keep glaciers from melting faster and oceans from rising faster and forests from burning faster and storms from growing stronger, we will condemn our children to a planet beyond their capacity to repair.
The Glacier Conference coincides with the United States taking its turn as leader of the Arctic Council. That's made up of all 8 countries that have territory in the Arctic, including Russia, which is now asserting even more territorial rights. Here in the U.S., environmental groups have called hypocrisy on Obama's approval of offshore oil drilling in the fragile Arctic, which will release even more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
Did the president speak to that apparent contradiction, decrying climate change, even after he's approved drilling in the otherwise pristine Arctic?
No, but Obama administration officials have previously said that their focus is to balance the needs of competing stakeholders, and we still need that oil, so that justifies drilling.
Okay.
Right-wing media, meanwhile, are apoplectic over Obama's announcement to restore the original Native American name to the nation's tallest mountain. Mount McKinley, named for early 20th century President William McKinley, who never actually visited it, was named by a gold prospector, a white guy. McKinley died in office a short time later. Now the mountain will be called what it has been called for thousands of years, Denali.
It's hysterical because Alaska is completely in favor of this. The only ones who seem to be furious about it are the right-wingers and the folks from Ohio, including Republican Senator Rob Portman, who said the mountain was named for President McKinley out of respect following his assassination. Newsflash for Republican U.S. Senator from Ohio, Rob Portman: the mountain was named Mount McKinley years before McKinley was killed.
Meanwhile, for the first time in recorded history, on Saturday, there were a record 3 simultaneous typhoons, all Category 4, churning in the eastern and central Pacific Ocean. Just to keep that in perspective, until this year, there had been only 3 hurricanes total in that region since 1950. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced that the Pacific Ocean is currently warmer than it has ever been in recorded history. And over in the Atlantic Ocean, newly formed Hurricane Fred is the farthest east a hurricane has ever formed off the coast of Africa, and it has generated the first ever hurricane warning for the Cape Verde Islands. The first ever in history. Finally, big news for the car industry. Electric car maker Tesla has again achieved the highest possible rating from Consumer Reports, 103 on a 100-point scale, the only car ever to do so. And BMW has announced that it is going all electric. Within 10 years, it will build only electric plug-in hybrid cars, converting its entire fleet in anticipation of stricter carbon emissions laws as the world transitions to clean energy.
Every BMW will be electric or hybrid in one way or another.
Yep.
In 10 years.
Yep, it's happening.
It's happening. For much more on all of these stories today and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
It is happening here. It is happening now.
Right here, right now. Watching the world wake up from history. Right here, right now. There is no other place I want.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
All because the gays are getting married, that is why people die and children go unfed. When I'm sad and alone, and I'm wondering just why everything about my life is feeling like it's going down a toilet bowl. It's good to know it's 'cause the gays.
Oh, yeah, it's the gays. That's the reason. Everything is bad. People die and the children cry. And of course, this woman, Kim Davis, is now going to jail. That's right. Today, the county clerk there in Kentucky was found in contempt of court and whisked off to federal custody, as I understand it. And look, this is one of those stories that has really just sucked all of the air out of everything else that's going on, income inequality, all of the people who are uninsured, all the poor, all the stuff. But I guess at some level we have to talk about it because it has consumed so much of the oxygen, which is why we've asked our good friend Ian Millhiser, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, also the editor of their ThinkProgress Justice blog, to come talk with us. Ian, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be back. Thanks, Rick.
So this woman, there's part of me that goes, okay, on one hand, maybe conviction, maybe something, or just greedy gold digger waiting for the cash flow to come.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that, the likely outcome here is that she's going to get a book deal and maybe a Fox News gig. And she's going to wind up, riding her celebrity because of this. That said, there's a very important underlying issue here, which is this looming battle over whether people who hold anti-gay sentiment can just exclude themselves, whether it's from following anti-discrimination law, or in this case, she's a government official, and whether she can exclude herself from providing basic services to gay people. And it's very important that courts, draw a firm line here and say, no, you don't get to decide what the law is for you. You have to follow the same laws that everyone else has to follow. You can't use your religious convictions in order to discriminate against people because of who they are. And she might wind up with book deals and all kinds of things because of this. But, there's only but so much room for people to get their celebrity status. And I think, I hope what comes of this is that a lot of folks are going to see what's happened here and go, oh, that could be me in jail, and there's not going to necessarily be an army of video cameras watching it happen. if I go down this road.
Right. And maybe that's what has to happen. But I look at this woman and I have no idea why she would push herself into the spotlight, given all of the flaws. And look, I look in the mirror as well. You know, I wouldn't want to be under that kind of scrutiny either. And I look at this and I just go, you know, I guess biblically, you know, what was that quote? Take the log out of your eye before you look at someone else. I mean, at some point, isn't that what you have to look at?
Yeah, I mean, she's on her 4th marriage right now.
She loves marriage.
I'm sorry?
She loves marriage. Staying married, not so much, but loves getting married.
So much that she keeps on doing it. Yeah, she's on her 4th marriage now. I think she's had 3 husbands. Her 4th husband is also, I believe, her 2nd husband. And yeah, I mean, I think the reason she's taken such a firm stand here is because I think her beliefs are sincere. I mean, she says that she really doesn't like gay people and she thinks God agrees with her. And I believe she's sincere within that belief. And, you know, I think it's because of that sincerity that, you know, she's decided to move forward with this, even though if she thought about it for 5 minutes, she might realize that, oh, you're exactly right. There is a big old log in my eye that I should do something about before I start worrying about what, you know, 2 men or 2 women who love each other and who actually know how to have an exclusive relationship, what they want to do with their lives.
And the thing that gets me is that I've had friends who have given me that, well, if we allow same-sex marriage, it'll ruin the sanctity of my marriage, which I got to be honest, heterosexuals have not done a real good job with the sanctity part. They've done a pretty good job destroying it on their own, but I don't understand how what people across the street in their 4 walls have to do with me and my 4 walls.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm standing here in Washington, D.C., where we've had marriage equality for nearly a decade. And, you know, I have all these friends who are married and, like, their marriages seem to be great. And, you know, they have kids and they seem to really love those kids and they seem to be really great parents. And, like, you know, if gay people are putting off this, like, chemical cloud that causes people to be unable to stay in their marriages and unable to love their children, then it must not be very potent, because all the people I know around here who are married seem to be just fine. It's a bizarre argument to say that, you know, if you allow 2 people who love each other to get married, then 2 other people who also love each other will somehow stop loving each other. You know, there's only but so much love to go around. If you give it out to the gay people, there won't be enough for straight people.
Yeah, I mean, it's an idiotic stance, but I mean, from the outside of the ethical, religious, all of that stuff, to me, this is a very simple situation. This is a public servant. This is someone who either you do the job that we the people have decided that you do under the laws of we the people, or you don't. You've got 2 choices: do it or go.
Yeah, I mean, well, and just the way that I think about it is, imagine if someone was breaking into your house and you called the police, and you know the 911 operator tells you, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't approve of you, so I'm not going to send a cop here. But if you call this other number, then like maybe they'll deem you to be worthy and they'll send a cop to you." And then, you know, you finally get in touch with the cop and the cop says, "Oh yeah, I'm not the cop who deals with your kind. You've got to talk to this other cop and, you know, they'll come out." I mean, that's not how government services work. You know, when you're a public servant, you serve the entire public.
Yep.
And you know, and if you don't get that, I mean, you know, you can have whatever beliefs you want in this country, but, you know, government work is not the appropriate job for you.
So the other question, a couple of that pop into my mind. If we allow her to have this right, and I have a lot of friends who think she should be able to stand her ground. I guess that's an interesting segue into, should we have someone who fundamentally disagrees with people owning firearms being able to not issue hunting license or gun license or any of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the issue is that she is in a largely administrative role. You know, she doesn't make the laws. She administers the laws. You know, there's a law saying who does and who does not get to have marriage licenses, and it's not her choice. You know, I mean, if she, you know, if she really cares deeply about this, she can run for the legislature, and then she can try to amend the Constitution. But you know, I mean, we don't want to live in a world where the law becomes whatever each minor and petty government official feels like it should be that day.
Well, I mean, I look at to look at some of the presidential candidates. Mike Huckabee came out and said that, you know, this woman is a person of great conviction, and that she doesn't have to follow the Supreme Court's ruling, that she should follow her conviction, and basically doing exactly the opposite of what you're saying.
Right, and I mean, it goes to a much larger fight that we're having. I mean, it's ultimately the same fight we had in the Hobby Lobby case about birth control. You know, it's the same fight we're seeing with these cake bakers and these photographers who refuse to offer their services to same-sex couples. You know, it's this notion that if you have an idiosyncratic religious belief, that you can simply exempt yourself from the law. And you know, what the rule was before Hobby Lobby was very sensible. It just said that, yeah, you do, and you should have broad religious freedoms. I mean, people really, you know, it's an important thing. You don't want to roll back people's religious freedoms. But where the line is that you can't use your religion in order to impose your beliefs on someone else, in order to take away someone else's rights. And, you know, that's the problem. You know, I mean, if Kim Davis disapproves of same-sex marriage, then she should not marry a woman.
There you go. Or as my grandfather said, you have the right to do whatever you want until your rights infringe upon mine. And she has the right to her beliefs until they infringe on somebody else's. But here's the other part of this. And you know, looking back at the presidential candidates, Rand Paul said that, you know, she's making an important stand and all of that nonsense. But he also says that maybe we should just stop our states should stop issuing marriage licenses, which is kind of an interesting thought coming from that side of the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, like, this is the same Rand Paul who said that we shouldn't have the Civil Rights Act, and who said that, you know, we should go back to the Lochner era when, like, you couldn't have any kind of meaningful regulation of the workplace. I mean, he's so obsessed with this libertarian vision that just cuts government out of the equation that, you know, I guess he wants to cut government out of marriage too. I mean, it's an interesting idea that, you know, law professors like to kick around, but you know, it strikes me as unworkable. I mean, the whole reason why we have a legal institution of marriage is because, you know, is because there are benefits, there are legal benefits that come along with being married. There are tax benefits. There's visitation rights. There's you know, presumptions about how your state passes along, and these are, you know, real tangible benefits that you know, there's a good reason why they're in the law. If you take the government out of the equation, then it's just any two people can say, yeah, we're married, and it doesn't really mean anything in the eyes of the law. They're still just two people. And, you know, I don't think there's much of a constituency for that view.
Yeah, I don't think there's much of a constituency, but I do have some friends who are going, well, that'd be just fine. And when they don't like each other, they can just leave. And well, we know the kids would suffer in that. But here's the bigger point to me. Why is this woman even elected? I mean, it seems like a bureaucratic role of just issuing licenses and doing this kind of stuff that you could pay any, you know, just any bureaucrat to do. Why give her the insulation of an elected position? Because look, I first thought, you know, Kentucky's an at-will state like Pennsylvania. Just fire her because she's not doing her job. And then I found out she was elected, and that adds a whole nother layer to this.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even have to be an at-will state. I mean, you could fire someone for cause if they refuse to do one of their important duties. Yeah, I mean, that really goes to the head of like why this has become such a big problem. It's that Kentucky, you know, decides to elect this fairly minor position, which, as far as I know, doesn't play much of a policymaking role whatsoever. And then once you're an elected official, she can only be removed by impeachment. So it would require the state legislature to vote to remove her in order for her to no longer hold this job, and that's not likely to happen. So yeah, she has, you know, a really absurd amount of job protection, you know, and frankly, like, you know, she has more job security than virtually anyone should have. I mean, I don't, you know, think it makes me like, you know, a management shill to say that if you have a job, you should do it. And, it's a valid reason to fire someone if there's something that's an essential part of their job that they simply refuse to do. And if it wasn't for the fact that, she's an elected official and she has these extraordinary protections, I imagine she would have been fired at this point.
So outside of, tomorrow when because at some point this has got to go away, or do you think this becomes like a litmus test for the presidential candidates?
I mean, what's interesting about it is, like, amongst the Republican candidates, it's actually become something that's dividing them, where, several have come out in her favor. Mike Huckabee has, and I believe Rand Paul had sort of the mealy mouth statement that you described earlier. But like Carly Fiorina and Chris Christie, I believe, have said, no, she can't do this. Even the Heritage Foundation, which is, the shop in Washington, D.C. that normally takes the most extreme possible conservative position on any issue, even they have said that it's too far for her to cut off marriage licenses altogether in her county. So, I think this is one of those issues where people on the right are pretty divided, and there's a fair contingency who thinks that she stepped over the line. And, everyone else in the country, I think, also thinks that she stepped over the line. So you're really looking at, a fringe that's decided to view her as a martyr.
So of this fringe, do they still make the Liberty Counsel and this woman wealthy is the question that I think of next. Because look, I think you're right. I think most of the presidential candidates have found their positions. I'd even read a paper yesterday that said even Scalia would side with firing this woman because do your job or quit.
Yeah. I mean, there just isn't that much. I mean, I think it's interesting that there haven't been any dissenting opinions. The judge who ordered her jailed is a George W. Bush appointee who is the son of a Republican senator, or a former Republican senator. So, I think in the judiciary, there's this sense about that whatever they feel about an individual case, making sure that court orders mean something is more important.
Right.
And they'll dig in once they feel that someone is defying the judiciary as an institution. I think that that's a common sense that people feel that, regardless of what they feel about the substantive issue, people don't get to be special laws unto themselves. And so I think a lot of people, even folks who disagree with marriage equality, are recoiling from her because they're saying, look, like, I may agree with you that in a perfect world, the law wouldn't be what it is right now, but you don't get to decide what the law is.
Right. So last line of questioning then, how long does she stay in jail?
It's an excellent question. I mean, like, it actually could be a fairly brief period of time, just because for very technical reasons dealing with the court's jurisdiction. There's only, I believe, 4 couples who are plaintiffs in this lawsuit. And tomorrow, the clerk's office is supposed to reopen, and it's going to start issuing licenses. And once that happens, the couples will probably show up, they'll get their licenses. And at that point, it's not clear that the court has jurisdiction anymore. Like, they might just have to release her. Because there's no longer a live case. I think if it's up to her, the answer is going to be she will stay in jail for as long as it takes for her to get a lucrative book deal.
There you go. But I guess that becomes the question when they release her. Does she go back to the old ways, and what happens then? Because is there any recourse to oust her from office?
I mean, that's tough. I mean, like, I was actually discussing this with some law professor friends of mine, and apparently there are some cases where there was a prison that was horribly mismanaged and a judge ordered the warden removed. So it might be possible to remove her. Like, that would be a big stretch. I think that the Supreme Court would want to weigh in on an order removing an elected official. And, for that reason, I think this judge is going to avoid that outcome if possible. But the other alternative could be this weird yo-yo effect where couples step forward and she refuses to let them get married. So then she's sent to jail, and then they get a license. And then once she's out, they get the license. There's no longer jurisdiction, so she's freed. And if she's willing to tolerate a life where like she's randomly shipped off to jail at a moment's notice, and the courts are willing to put up with that, maybe that's just what people have to live with in that county.
Yeah.
But I think like it will be a heavy lift. It's possible, but it will be a heavy lift for a court to actually fire her.
That would be fun, because then that part of Kentucky would become the new Las Vegas for gay couples.
Yeah, no, I mean it would be hilarious just to like, you could show up and you could send Kim Davis to jail.
There you go. All right, good stuff, Ian. I appreciate you taking time explaining this stuff to us.
All right, sure thing.
Thanks so much, Ian. Let's take a quick break. Back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show.
We gotta take the bastards down.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. Unions representing at least 150 million workers have begun a 2-day national strike in India. Only a portion of that total actually participated, but tens of millions did walk off the job in sectors as diverse as banking, mining, and transportation. The target of their frustrations are major market reforms being pursued by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's finding it difficult to overhaul an unwieldy economy, albeit one with high growth potential. A large-scale privatization of industry remains on the table, as does a reduction in the number of national labor laws from 44 to just 4. In another proposal, corporations with less than 300 workers would no longer need government permission to initiate layoffs.
It's an illusion for members of Congress to think that they can vote this plan down and then turn around and still persuade countries like China, Japan, South Korea, Turkey, India, Iran's major oil customers. They ought to continue supporting the sanctions that are costing them billions of dollars every year. It's not going to happen.
Secretary of State John Kerry there, delivering part of the Obama administration's closing argument in support of the Iranian nuclear deal before a congressional vote next week. And the administration scored a major victory today as the 34th senator announced support for the deal. That pledge came from Maryland Democrat Barbara Mikulski and delivers Obama a firewall of support should Congress pass a bill against the deal and the president need to sustain a veto. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Who needs friends? Friends like you. Who needs friends? Friends like you. Who needs friends with friends like you?
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you're going to get the podcast. Get the Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. A couple of the other reactions from the presidential candidates. Marco Rubio says, while the clerk's office has a governmental duty to carry out the law, there should be a way to protect religious freedom and conscience rights of individuals in the office. So I'm guessing he's coming out on her side. Ted Cruz said there should be ways, alternative ways to ensure government functions are accomplished without infringing on religious liability. Explain how that works. I'm kind of confused. Bobby Jingle Jangle Jindal said nobody should have to choose between following their conscience and their religious beliefs and giving up their jobs. Lindsey Graham said do it or get out. Fiorina kind of the same way, but also a little mealy-mouthed on the religious freedom. And my favorite is Scott Walker, who I actually don't know where his position is. Something rambled on about something about states' rights, rambled on about something about some vague, bizarre statement on, I don't know. one man, one woman, and all of the talking points he could get into one sentence. Nothing from Bush, Santorum, Trump, Kasich, or Perry yet. We'll see. Quick break. Right back. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. A broad-based coalition of 80 groups are calling on United Parcel Service to end its membership in ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. The Teamsters are part of the coalition of labor, religious, environmental, investor, public interest, civil rights, and public health groups. The Teamsters say the coalition is encouraging UPS to leave ALEC over concerns about the organization's extreme agenda and secretive practices. More than 100 corporations and hundreds of legislators have left ALEC. They include Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Yelp, Yahoo, eBay, AOL, International Paper, Occidental Petroleum, Northrop Grumman, BP, T-Mobile, Shell Oil, and Canadian National Railway. The Teamsters say UPS shouldn't be in ALEC because the organization's secretive practices threaten our democracy. The Teamsters say ALEC's practices are clearly out of line with the corporate culture and ethical standards expected by UPS shareholders and customers. Toll collectors on Chicago's Skyway making an average of $11 an hour could strike soon. Their contract has expired, and Teamsters Local 727 says the toll collectors are taking a strike vote. The Chicago Skyway is a major route out of the city, and a strike could impact Labor Day weekend traffic flow. Local 727 President John Coley says the ball is in management's court. He says either the company can do the right thing and offer a fair agreement, or force the workers to hit the picket lines to fight for fair wages, benefits, and working conditions that they deserve. Now here's Frank Emspak with WIN's news analysis.
The aftermath of Katrina is on many people's minds. So is the aftermath of the stormy stock market. What do they have in common? In the aftermath of Katrina, we find the income gap between the working poor and the wealthy has grown. Positive impacts of the recovery in New Orleans are skewed upwards. The benefits of the stock price recovery, if it continues, are also skewed upwards. But the low wage problem remains. Most workers have not received meaningful wage increases in years, and in fact, increased costs for food, communications, transportation, education have made it impossible for most working families to accumulate wealth. Increasing inequality will not change until the wages in this country are increased substantially and indexed to inflation. This, of course, is the challenge faced by the UAW and the auto negotiations and the Verizon workers in their negotiations. I'm Frank Emspak for Workers Independent News.
The Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from the Bank of Labor, a division of Brotherhood Bank and Trust, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. Union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor offers a business Visa card with no annual fee and points earned with every purchase, along with rental vehicle and travel accident insurance. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
Everybody's got a price. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So the Commerce Department has released the monthly trade deficit figures. And I got to be honest with you, nothing surprising here. It's been as it's been for probably the entire decade I've been doing these shows. Our trade deficit is growing. Our portion of it with China is getting worse, and free trade is killing us. That pretty much narrows it down. I could go through all the boring numbers, but at the end of the day, China's kicking our behinds. And what is it? I think 3/4 of our trade deficit is with China. Kind of got to go, what are we doing? And then we're still talking about a bad trade deal that's going to make things worse. Well, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to reach out to Celeste Drake. She is the Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist with the AFL-CIO. Celeste, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I look at these numbers at 3/4 of our trade deficit. Now we had almost a $42 billion trade deficit in July. 31.5 billion of that with China alone. I think there's a problem, and there's one direction where it started.
There's absolutely a problem. And you might hear out there from the world of punditry that this month's figures mean things are looking up because we exported slightly more and imported slightly less than last month. But that's really like taking such a myopic view. If you take the incredible trade deficit that we have with China, you add to it the incredible trade deficit that we have with the EU, with which the U.S. government's trying to negotiate an agreement for even more corporate-centered trade, the incredible trade deficit with Japan, which is in the TPP, which is another corporate trade deal. With all of these countries and regions, we have trade deficits this year that are already on track to be larger than they were last year. So in other words, the overall trend is that things are getting worse. So don't be fooled by, the slight, better improvement in the numbers for July.
I mean, I look at this, and at some point, don't we have to? I think last year's trade deficit was like $720 billion. And we're going to do worse than this year, and I probably worse next year, especially if this bad trade deal goes through. Which it's amazing to me, Celeste, that in this day and age, we've got politicians who are still willing to go, yeah, we need more of the bad things. You remember Korea? They told us the chorus was going to just be this great agreement. Well, here we are already, massive trade deficit with them. I thought this was supposed to create jobs. In fact, in the July report, $2.6 billion already trade deficit with Korea.
And on track to be worse than last year. And Korea's just new. So one could look at the figures from Korea and say, well, the 75,000 jobs that we have already lost to Korea from this very recent agreement, it's anomaly. It's not usual. But that would mean you have to go back and look at the real facts. And if you look at NAFTA, which is the longest term trade agreement that we've had, it went into force in 1994. That's actually not the case. NAFTA follows the exact pattern as Korea. We get into a trade deal that's pitched as going to create jobs, going to, increase wages, going to do all these wonderful, fantastical things. And then you look at the real evidence, and the real evidence says we went from a small deficit with Canada to a larger one, and we went from a tiny surplus with Mexico to a sizable deficit. Things are moving in the wrong direction, and the problem really isn't trade per se. It's the rules set up for the trade, which really put all the power and all in the hands of the large global corporations, and really leave everyone else to their own devices. And so what that has meant in practice is businesses taking advantage of workers on, both sides of the border. Wages are stagnating. Small businesses find it tougher to compete. Small services companies are out there struggling. And really, there are gains, and they're all going to the top.
Yeah, and there have been a couple of reports from EPI and from the National Employment Law Project today that we've talked about that have just highlighted exactly what you've said. The 1% are taking all of the gains and sucking all the productivity and all the wealth out while threatening workers with these trade agreements. And, there's part of me that goes, at some point, do we not revolt over this and have a mass cleaning, if you will, of our Congress and our political class?
Well, if you look at what's happening out there in the, pre-election year, atmosphere, it seems like some of that is happening. I mean, if you look at the candidates that are talking about trade as a problem for our economy on both the right and the left, they're catching folks' influence and interest, and they're catching fire. And I think it really resonates. Folks know there's a lot of things wrong with the economy. It's rigged in any number of ways against rights in the workplace, with unfair skewed tax policy, with unfair skewed trade policy. And when folks say to them, there's a problem, China's beating us, Mexico's beating us, that resonates. Now, obviously, there's more to the story, and It's not as if the working people of Mexico are doing great, or the working people of China, they can't exercise their rights. But clearly something's happening here, and I just hope it continues to be part of the narrative and the discussion, because you're right, we can't go on when we have terrible numbers like a record high figure, 30 billion in imports of autos and auto parts for July, the record high of all time.
Yeah, I mean, that again, we've lost that industry, and I shouldn't say we lost it. We know exactly where it is. It was stolen by the Chinese. We know exactly where those jobs are. And what's frustrating to me is I still have my free trade ideologue friends who believe in this mythical, this guy with the invisible hand who's going to do all this stuff. And I look at the Chinese who are cheating at every turn. And look, if you allow them to do it, they're going to do it. And if you don't hit them with a stick, eventually they're going to let us do it as much as we want, which is what we're seeing. And I look at currency manipulation, which, as I understand, and you're the expert in this, the Trans-Pacific Partnership doesn't even really address.
Doesn't address it at all. And in fact, the administration, when the U.S. Trade Ambassador, Michael Froman, has come up to Congress and testified about the TPP a couple of times over the recent years, he has said, basically, this is an issue for the Treasury Department. We're not going to deal with it. And for those who are standing up for working people in Congress, they know that answer is not good enough. They say, wait a minute, now's a perfect opportunity. You've got these countries, everyone's at the table, everyone's ready to give and take. They all want into the U.S. market. They want to send their exports to us. So now's a perfect time to ask them to give a little bit on currency policy. And interestingly enough, there was just an article today that came out that says the White House, which had previously threatened a veto on a currency bill, is now turning around and asking Congress, please send me a currency bill. Now, will it be a meaningful bill? Are they now asking for the same bill that they threatened to veto? It's unclear, but I think the message that, manipulating currency in order to gain a trade advantage will no longer be tolerated.
Well, that's about time, don't you think? I mean, it's only been when did the Chinese come into the WTO? What, 96 was it?
Oh, no, around 2000. So it's about 15 years ago.
Okay, so they've been cheating for 15 years and we now getting around to it?
Well, and yes, every administration, Democrat, Republican, has refused to label China a currency manipulator, even when it's been completely obvious to neutral economic observers. The Peterson Institute for International Economics joins EPI in saying currency manipulation is real, it's happening, and it's cost America jobs. So this is not a partisan issue, it's a factual analysis, and why administrations have been so slow to get on board. It's really disappointing, because if you look at any potential gains that could come from the TPP conceivably, in the best of all possible worlds, if they got the rules right, which we don't have a lot of confidence in, even the promises made about it could be undermined overnight by currency manipulation. And everybody knows it. It's not a secret. Yep. And to fail to address it is really, really burying your head in the sand.
You said something there a second ago, Celeste, that, everybody wants access to our market because, look, we still are the wealthiest economy in the world for now. And what bothers me is we've given that advantage away. I don't know. Look, I've sat down and negotiated contracts. I've sat down and had, negotiations, even just buying a car, if you will. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't cede my greatest strength in the negotiations as we have done. So I got to question who's sitting at the table and what are the priorities that they're taking to the table with them, because it certainly isn't the working people on all political stripes. Take that completely aside. It's certainly not the working class of this country.
But yet the working class of this country has been really the big loser in all these previous trade agreements and continues to be. And it's not enough that, the U.S. trade representative opens the door and has a meeting. You have to actually look at the advice that's given, look at the things that need to change so that workers can benefit from trade, because it is possible, but we just haven't seen it because nobody will put those rules in. And you have to take that advice. And rather than, what we have experienced here at the AFL-CIO is we have lots of meetings with the USTR. We give lots of advice. And rather than real change in trade policy, we see change at the level of talking points. Oh, well, labor's talking about shared prosperity and rising wages, so that will be our new terms on which we pitch why the TPP is a good agreement. But, you know, you have data, you have year-to-date worse trade deficits in things the U.S. should be making: advanced technologies, power generating machinery, office machines, furniture, scientific equipment, paper, autos, and auto parts. Those are things we should be excelling in, and we're not. We're doing worse than last year, and that's a bad sign. And when you talk to, I talked to some trade ministers from Africa last week. They came to visit, and we had a discussion about, you know, every single country in the world cannot have as its basis of economic growth export-led growth.
Nope.
Because that's like a town saying everyone's above average. It's somebody has to import too. And the more that the structure of the economy and our rules that are really skewed against workers in the U.S. stagnate our wages and push our wages down, you know, at some point, the U.S. is no longer going to be the market, the consumer of last resort. What we have to do is devise rules and a system that truly lift all boats and lift wages everywhere, because we want to make things, American workers want to make things that we sell abroad, and certainly workers elsewhere want to make things that they can sell here, but it has to be a two-way street. And that's where not addressing currency manipulation by China, or not addressing subsidized steel tubing from Korea, or all of these other things, they all come into play.
Or tires from China, or all of the other cases that we've seen. See, to me, there would have to be some kind of a leveling mechanism, something along the lines that, you know, John Maynard Keynes had the idea of having a global currency, the Bancor, and having things float and having penalties for people who have really huge amounts of exports and all of that. There's got to be, in my mind, some kind of leveling mechanism that everyone's not going to be an exporter, and that we're not going to be the, as you pointed out, the import of last resort.
Absolutely, and there are certainly ways to do that. There are lots of ideas about how to address currency manipulation, and, you know, it would be, I think, a system that allowed you to, as you know, Ralph Gomery has suggested, you know, if you had a terrible deficit like the U.S. does, perennial terrible deficit that's the largest in world history, that you develop a system where you had, you know, import certificates to sort of balance it, you know, so that you could eventually get to balance. There are a lot of ways to approach it, but the U.S. Has gotten itself into such a bunch of rules, particularly at the WTO, along with these regional trade agreements with, you know, NAFTA, that kind of thing is not allowed. That these assumptions, like you said, back to these textbook assumptions that all trade will eventually balance. But then we've put in a bunch of policies and restrictions that won't let it come to balance.
Yeah, on paper it looks great. On paper it looks
it's a
great.
fantastic system.
When I coached little kid football, every play, you know, scored a 100-yard touchdown, every one of them. On paper, they were fabulous. Didn't work so well on the field, but on paper, they were great. But here's the system that we've set up, and this is really bizarre to me, and I don't think most people get it. By us having the reserve currency, when we buy all of this cheap plastic crap from China, we send that money over there to them. They then bring it back because they've got to use it here, and they buy up the industries, ship it back over to China, and continue. It's this vicious cycle of us continually getting worse off because they're buying us from within and buying our corporations and buying all that stuff up and making us buy their products, and
it adds to the power, frankly, of Wall Street, because there's an influx of all this money looking for ever higher and better returns.
Yep.
So Wall Street is flush with cash, and, you know, it's part of what led to the Great Recession, because there was all this money, a lot of it from China, looking for more creative and artful high return vehicles to invest money into. And, you know, then you got all of those crazy things that people invested in. And when the crash hit, it was too much. And these imbalances, it's not just, as you said, trade imbalances. its financial imbalances, and they feed off of each other. And the U.S. needs to start thinking that, the interests of the U.S. are coincident with the people who live here and the good of the people who live here, rather than thinking that U.S. interests are coincident with U.S. corporations, which just use the U.S. as a flag of convenience. Because frankly, it's fantastic that Apple is a successful corporation, but when you look at all of the money that it's making, how much of it even ever comes back to the United States, and how much stays overseas where it's free from taxes, and how much comes back here and goes into our economy and pays people living wages and all of those things? Not a lot. So we can't really afford to pretend that what is good for businesses that claim the U.S. as a flag of convenience is necessarily good for the rest of us.
Excellent point. Last question I've got for you, because we just had this whole Wall Street scare and everyone's fixated on the daily number. How much of what happened is a correction with China? How much of this is the new economy that we've now created because we're really dependent on them? I'm curious your thoughts.
Look, I think there's a little of both. I think, China, it's amazing that the Chinese economy is such that, 7% growth for the year seems disappointing, right? What the U.S. wouldn't give for 7%
No kidding.
growth. But look, the devaluation, which China did, which was about 4%, really wiped out all of the appreciation that China had done over the last 4 years. And I think it panicked, from my view, it panicked the markets a little bit, but over the long term, that's sort of day-to-day, stock churning, and doesn't have a lot to do with the real economy of making things and making a living. And there is a bit of a slowdown in China, but China has massive surpluses and massive exports. And that's going to continue for the foreseeable future, and is not going to be, it's only going to get worse with continued devaluation.
Yeah, and the first part of this to me is we need to stop this TPP thing. And I suggest folks go to the AFL-CIO website, AFL-CIO.org, their site. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Celeste's name, because this is where we need to be calling our legislators, calling daily, saying no, 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 no.
Absolutely no. And the problem is the TPP, again, it's being pitched somehow as it's going to fix the China problem. And, what people might not know, if they haven't been following, is China's not even in it. So what happens in the Chinese economy will affect what happens with its trading partners, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, who are in it. But certainly the TPP, it's going to make the U.S. economy weaker by putting downward pressure on our wages, and in no way does that help us compete against China.
Absolutely not. Celeste Drake, I appreciate you taking a little time for us. Thanks so much for your insight.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Celeste is the global trade person over there at the AFL-CIO Policy Specialist. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Make his farm no more.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1928. 300 musicians working in Chicago went on strike against 250 movie theaters. They were protesting their impending replacement by talking pictures. This was part of a nationwide wave of protests by the American Federation of Musicians. The union had amassed $1.5 million to fight laying off musicians who played at the movies. From the inception of cinema, Thomas Edison had hoped to merge sound and film. Since this did not happen in the early days of movies, the films used intertitles and had musical accompaniment. This music ranged from an orchestra in the large urban theaters to a single piano player in smaller theaters. Across the country, 75,000 musicians worked in movie theaters. This live music played an essential role in setting the mood of the film, building dramatic tension, and enhancing the movie-going experience. However, there was considerable difficulty matching other sound to film visuals. Studios. Western Electric and Bell Telephone produced the first commercially viable movie sound system. It hooked up a very large phonograph to a film projector. This was first used in the film Don Juan in 1926. But the next year, in October of 1927, the opening of the Al Jolson film The Jazz Singer marked the introduction of the first successful talking picture. Talking pictures were a boom to many comedic vaudevillian performers such as Jack Benny and the Marx Brothers, who could now translate their comedy onto film. As a result, musicians, members of the American Federation of Musicians, were no longer needed to provide musical accompaniment. By the end of 1928, nearly 2,000 theater musicians in the U.S. were unemployed. By 1929, nearly half of the nation's movie theaters had converted to sound. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I got a list of demands written on the palm of my hands. I'm on this and you got no right stand. We live in and about. You wanna be somebody, see somebody.
Real quick, the big numbers. Highest trade deficit with China this year, $31.57 billion, or 3/4 of our entire deficit of almost $42 billion in July. Japan, $5.7 billion trade deficit. Korea, $2.6 billion trade deficit. And you go, hey, I thought we were going to have a surplus. I thought we were supposed to do really well with those countries. I thought that was supposed to help. And look, I can't emphasize enough. And this is where it doesn't matter what your political stripe is. To me, the fact that we have allowed the Chinese to eat our lunch and beat us, and not even just beat us, because I don't know that we've ever had a chance in this. This has been policy driven by the ideologues who think, oh, the free market and free trade, we're going to sell that because they laid the groundwork. I can't tell you how many people I believe, oh, private good, public bad, free market good, anything else bad. And you go, but stagnant wages, declining wages, higher productivity, more wealth for the rich, everybody else struggling. That doesn't seem to be the recipe for success. And all the job losses that we're seeing. Think about this for a second, because this is the world that we live in. Whether you like it or not, this is our reality. The United States has the reserve currency. The dollar is the global currency. All trade is done in dollars. So when we send a dollar over to China, they send us something, we buy it with our dollars here in the local store. Those dollars go into an account over in China, and they then hold this stuff. They buy our treasury debts, they buy, whatever we have. And in a lot of cases, they come and they buy American corporations. I've talked a couple of times about the smart bombs, because we've got these smart bombs, these smart missiles that are really brilliant. They got chips in them that are fabulous, and they got magnets that help them get to where they're going. Fabulous. Problem is, the only companies that make those two products are now in China because they bought them here and we allowed them to buy them here. They crated them up, put them in nice boxes, put them on a ship, and boom, right over to China. And then they recreated that factory there. So that then we had to buy them from them, which means more money going to them, and of course more money for them to come back here and to buy other things. They are literally buying us through our consumption. And this is why one of those things that I talk about, think about where you're spending your money. Think about what you're spending your money on. Because the consumption that you go to the Walmart or go to the big box retailer where, there's one thing on the shelf and it's from China. That's your only option now. We've destroyed U.S. competition. That whole idea of competition's done. Forget about it. It's now what's on the shelf. And they're using that to buy us up. And what's frustrating to me on so many levels is I don't know that we get it. I don't know that we get that we're literally being bought. And all of this talk of one world government and all the Democrats, Republicans, don't worry about them so much as worry about the Chinese. And I think this is why Donald Trump is catapulted to the front, because I think most people get this. If we could get past our political divides, at least on this issue, and talk about the economy in a way that benefits everyone and not just, well, I'm going to have my little slice of it and I'm not sharing. It's mine, mine, mine. Maybe we could change the country as a whole. Because, look, most of my union friends, they want their companies to be wildly successful because they say, look, if the boss is doing better, I'm going to do better. We're going to all do better together. But that sentiment is never turned around. You hear the CEO of Caterpillar saying there's never enough profit. We can never squeeze enough out. It's never going to be enough. While they're slashing wages for workers and cutting benefits and outsourcing and all of those things. Why? Maximize more profit for them and the hell with everybody else. At some point, they have to be held accountable. At some point, we have to say enough already. And at some point, we've got to stop China or we stop buying their stuff. But I'll tell you right now, we signed the TPP as it is right now from what I've known, because we haven't been able to see it. No more Buy American provisions. No more procurement that's based on, oh, you know what? There's John down the street has a factory who makes this little widget that we can use. No, we've got to buy it somewhere else. Telling you, bad deal. Bad deal all the way around. And we're going to talk about this all the way into the fall. This is going to be a huge issue in the next couple of weeks as we go forward. Going to take a quick break. Right back with Talk Radio News Service. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'll never bend. I'm with you now until the end.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with a heart. The voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
We are not moving fast enough.
President Obama makes powerful case for climate action on the edge of the melting Arctic.
Amazing. At one point, we had 4-category hurricanes in the Pacific.
2015 hurricane season has now entered weird, record-breaking territory. Huge news for electric cars. Plus,
The guy saw that mountain when he was one of the first up there and named it after the president. No reason to change it.
right-wingers apoplectic over renaming of nation's tallest mountain.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You said, oh, Bill Maher, he's going to drag me through the mud. Yeah. First of all, you're in California. It hasn't rained in 4 years. There's no mud. Yeah.
It's true. There's no mud here in California. None. Zero. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, you seem to be quite moved by the president's speech up in the Arctic.
Yeah, it was a very, very powerful speech, and I highly recommend listening to it. He was at the Glacier Conference in Alaska. He called for urgent and aggressive global action on climate change. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. And with that background of melting glaciers and melting permafrost, Obama emphasized the need to act quickly or suffer the consequences.
The Arctic is the leading edge of climate change. It is happening here. It is happening now. And climate change is a trend that affects all trends. Economic trends, security trends, everything will be impacted.
And he was blunt about the consequences of continuing business as usual.
The fact is that climate is changing faster than our efforts to address it. We are not moving fast enough. If we were to abandon our course of action, if we stop trying to build a clean energy economy and reduce carbon pollution, if we do nothing to keep glaciers from melting faster and oceans from rising faster and forests from burning faster and storms from growing stronger, we will condemn our children to a planet beyond their capacity to repair.
The Glacier Conference coincides with the United States taking its turn as leader of the Arctic Council. That's made up of all 8 countries that have territory in the Arctic, including Russia, which is now asserting even more territorial rights. Here in the U.S., environmental groups have called hypocrisy on Obama's approval of offshore oil drilling in the fragile Arctic, which will release even more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
Did the president speak to that apparent contradiction, decrying climate change? even after he's approved drilling in the otherwise pristine Arctic?
No, but Obama administration officials have previously said that their focus is to balance the needs of competing stakeholders, and we still need that oil, so that justifies drilling.
Okay.
Right-wing media, meanwhile, are apoplectic over Obama's announcement to restore the original Native American name to the nation's tallest mountain. Mount McKinley, named for early 20th century President William McKinley, who never actually visited it, was named by a gold prospector, a white guy. McKinley died in office a short time later. Now the mountain will be called what it has been called for thousands of years, Denali.
It's hysterical because Alaska is completely in favor of this. The only ones who seem to be furious about it are the right-wingers and the folks from Ohio, including Republican Senator Rob Portman, who said the mountain was named for President McKinley out of respect following his assassination. Newsflash for Republican U.S. Senator from Ohio, Rob Portman: the mountain was named Mount McKinley years before McKinley was killed.
Meanwhile, for the first time in recorded history, on Saturday, there were a record 3 simultaneous typhoons, all Category 4, churning in the eastern and central Pacific Ocean. Just to keep that in perspective, until this year, there had been only 3 hurricanes total in that region since 1950. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced that the Pacific Ocean is currently warmer than it has ever been in recorded history. And over in the Atlantic Ocean, newly formed Hurricane Fred is the farthest east a hurricane has ever formed off the coast of Africa, and it has generated the first ever hurricane warning for the Cape Verde Islands. The first ever in history. Finally, big news for the car industry. Electric car maker Tesla has again achieved the highest possible rating from Consumer Reports, 103 on a 100-point scale, the only car ever to do so. And BMW has announced that it is going all electric. Within 10 years, it will build only electric plug-in hybrid cars, converting its entire fleet in anticipation of stricter carbon emissions laws as the world transitions to clean energy.
Every BMW will be electric or hybrid in one way or another.
Yep.
In 10 years.
Yep, it's happening.
It's happening. For much more on all of these stories today and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
It is happening here. It is happening now.
Right here, right now. Watching the world wake up from history. Right here, right now. There is no other place I want.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
So the big news of the day, the Christian martyr, Kim Davis, in jail. As we talked about earlier, not sure how long she's going to be sitting there. Could this be one of those things? Tomorrow morning they have to release her after the couples who wanted to get married get their license. Don't know. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. Also, the other big news of the day for all of my Patriot friends, Tom Brady found not guilty, I guess, if that's what you will, of the whole deflate thing, and I guess no suspension. So interesting big stories of the day. Here to talk a little bit more about those and then whatever else pops up. Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, yes, Rick. Let me create the headline. Are you ready?
Hit me with it.
Barack Obama jails Christians. Okay? Barack Obama jails Christians. Now, the only problem with that headline is that it was a Bush-appointed Republican judge, actual son of a former Republican congressman, Jim Bunning, who jailed her.
You can't say that.
Well, I know, but, I just thought I'd throw the two headlines out there.
That's beautiful. And you're probably right. Muslim president.
Yes, jails Christians, it's begun. Oh. And I say this because she's been jailed, and it was by a judge appointed by the Republicans, son of a former congressman, Jim Bunning, the famous baseball player. But
right.
Here's the thing. The clerks are going to carry out the marriage as the deputy clerks. And then they're looking for ways around, they meaning the legislature, whatever, that she can do her duty, et cetera, but still have her beliefs. Not all, and this is a good sign, not all of the Republican presidential candidates bought into this. Of course, Huckabee did. Bobby Jindal did, which surprised me, really, it did. Bought into, she should have the right to not uphold the law, but Cardi Farino didn't. I haven't heard from Bush and Trump, but I don't think they'll buy into it. And so this is not going to be one of those issues where the entire nation, goes with pitchforks because they're jailing Christians. This person was elected and they have to uphold the law. Let me reverse this. Let's say in that county, which is a concealed carry state, all right? Let's say somebody walks up there, Rick, and says to the sheriff, elected sheriff, I would want my concealed and carry permit. And the sheriff says, well, the way I read the Bible, I can't give that to you.
Right.
Wonder what would happen. So
I think the NRA would flip.
Well, of course.
But again, to me, all of this stuff comes down to the money that these groups are going to generate. Look, they use us as pawns to make their PR pitches, and I'm waiting for the email barrage to come at any minute, asking for donations to Liberty Counsel and who knows who else, because our religious liberty is being stolen from us. And it just seems to be this political game of fundraising, which to me is insane.
Well, yes. I mean, do we also break it down to where if it's a Catholic clerk, they'll feel a little bit different than a Protestant clerk will about upholding certain laws? I mean, really, is that what it's going to boil down to? A sort of Iranian theocratic rule of religion? But I'm really, honestly amazed that some of the Republican can't. Well, I guess I'm not amazed, but shocked of the lack of political sense of buying into this.
How much of this is things do you think these people truly believe, and it's just political expedience? You got Donald Trump out there saying his favorite book is the Bible. Really? I would think his favorite book would be the Ledger that tells him how much money he's got, but that's a whole another thing. But you've got to pander to people like this Kim Davis, who would see her as this martyr because they're such a powerful voting bloc.
Well, I mean, some people will. I mean, Kim Davis, if you want to talk about religion, she's had 4 marriages.
Yeah.
So, we can find some specific things in the Bible about that. I mean, if you just can't do interpretations of any religion. Wonder if, in fact, and I'll throw this scenario out there, what's good for one is good for all. Wonder if somebody is elected and they're Muslim and they came out and said, well, we're not going to allow this food to be sold because it's pork. I mean, there's all these scenarios about religion. And if we're a land of freedom of religion and we start letting religion rule and make the law work for whatever your religious belief is and you're elected, we've got problems. And the judge knew that.
Yeah, I mean, and even, we go back and justify slavery with religion as we've done in this country.
Well, it's very interesting you mentioned that. I heard Shepard, the Fox News correspondent today.
Yeah.
And I usually don't say the networks, but I heard him today say these are the same arguments they used to justify slavery. I was in shock. He actually said that today.
Yeah, I mean, Shepard Smith's not usually absolutely horrible. I mean, he's at Fox. He's got to toe the company line, but occasionally he lets something slip by accident.
Boy. He did today, and I thought it was a very fascinating statement that he said they've almost used verbatim. She did, the lines to justify not doing certain things with civil rights because of religion.
Right.
So
I was going to say interracial marriage as well.
Now she's got to figure out how to get out.
Well, now that's the other thing. I had talked with our legal correspondent a little bit earlier, and he said that he thinks, and they're not sure because this is one of those weird kind of cases, that as soon as the marriage licenses are issued, that the contempt order would go away because it's done, and then she would be released, and that the next time a couple comes in seeking a license, they would have to arrest her again for not doing it to be in contempt until it's released, and you'd have this bizarre yo-yo effect, which I've been thinking might make that county the Las Vegas of gay marriage.
Everybody would go there.
Because I think it would be hysterical. You could say, at the dinner party 10 years into your anniversary or whatever, we went and got married and we've got the clerk of courts thrown in jail.
Right, exactly. If she keeps going in jail till her term ends.
Which would be, and I hope she gets reelected. So let's move on. Let's find out what else is going on. I understand Obama has sealed the Iran deal, huh?
It's done. Senator Barbara Mikulski from Maryland gave him the 34th vote, and so it's done. Everybody can scream, they can holler, they can run ads, they can spend money as they please. This is done. So now the candidates who want to turn around and say, as soon as I get my hand off the Bible, I'm going to reverse the Iran deal, are not going to be telling the truth. This will be way gone by that time. And so therefore, eventually somebody's going to have to get serious about talking about monitoring and make it effective so that there is not a nuclear Iran.
So the big rally that's scheduled, I guess, in Philadelphia on the 13th, going to be for naught, because they're threatening. They're saying that if this goes through, it's going to be nuclear annihilation and it'll be the end times and all this. And they're having a big rally. I guess not going to help, huh?
No, and then the other thing is, I mean, did anybody really think that the Congress really seriously, the Republican-controlled Congress, really seriously thought they were going to reverse this? Because look, they knew when they didn't force the issue that this is a treaty, not an agreement, which they didn't do. They also knew when they sent the president a bill, they created that insane 30-day or 60-day overlook of it. Depends on when the president did the deal or not. Did they really think something was going to come of that? Look, they couldn't have a vote on whether to approve this or not because that wouldn't pass. So they had to have the vote to disapprove. And they also knew the House was never going to do that.
Right.
Veto proof.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it was going to go through. It's just a matter of all of the pandering back and forth. Let's look back to the Republican presidential candidates. Were you surprised that Donald Trump today came out and signed the big loyalty pledge?
No, I predicted it, and I'll tell you why. Here's the backstory to this. This is my point of view from everything I know that I think is pretty solid. Donald Trump knew that there were secret meetings at one point in time prior to the first debate. Those meetings involved hierarchy of the Republican Party and involved other candidates, people too, and money people. The whole purpose of the meeting, Rick, was to say, how do we stop Donald Trump? How do we put him out of business politically? That was the purpose of the meeting. So Trump goes to the first debate. He takes a little gamble, and he says, I won't sign the pledge. The party people smiled, but then all of a sudden, the debate ended, and guess who won the debate? Donald Trump. So now he had a meeting with the head of the Republican Party, Priebus, and he came out and he signed it. He made the right move in this poker game, because if they're out to get you and they're plotting against you, then you say, fine, I'll ruin your whole party.
Yep.
And then they had to come to terms with him. Donald Trump beat the Republican Party with this one.
Yeah, I mean,
not the Republican Party, but the hierarchy that didn't want him, the Just Jeb people.
Yeah, I was for a second I stopped and I go, I was surprised for a moment. And then I thought about, half of his money is tied up in the brand that is his name. And you don't really want to get into that kind of a contest with the other members of the wealth class. And then this, it makes perfect sense.
Yes, and again, knowing that backstory that did occur where they had that meeting, Trump did take a gamble the first debate when he said, I won't sign it. The audience could have gasped and booed him and, he was done with, but he didn't. He knew, because had he said yes that day, they would have proceeded to group against him and proceeded to try to take him out.
Yeah,
and then he couldn't have done anything about it. Nothing. He couldn't have done a thing about it.
Yeah,
he played the right move.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of, he's made right decisions. I got to give him credit on that. As funny as he is, and as far out there, got to give him credit where credit is due.
That's right.
And finally, what something going on up in Massachusetts with a policeman? What's going on?
Yes, up in an area, more rural area of Massachusetts, Mills it's called, and the policeman who said that he was shot, 2 shots into the cruiser crashed and caught on fire. They have now found out, and they haven't released his name, he's 27. They found out he fabricated the entire story. He did it himself. So they're not sure if he set the car on fire, then crashed it, or crashed it and set it on fire, but wanted to make a name for himself, I guess, and be one of the ones, quote, shot at, and this is not going to go well for him.
How insane.
Yes, I thought about it. Where was his mind? I mean, seriously.
I mean, it makes no sense to me whatsoever. What and I guess the sad reality is when you get into police work, you get some of these folks. I had a friend who was I have a bunch of friends who were volunteer firemen, and they always said, if you see things that go on, look to one of the volunteer firemen, because sometimes you get arsonists who are drawn to that, and I guess it's this kind of job. You get crazy people who are drawn to it.
Yeah, and the policemen, you got to feel bad for the policemen out there trying to do their job, and all of a sudden this guy comes along. So they've got to work to correct this. I would assume at some point in time the Fraternal Order of Police itself as a union will say, hey, maybe we ought to take some measures just to do some screening or something.
Well, they do a lot of screening. I mean, I know a bunch of people who have gone through the whole process and for one reason or another have been weeded out. There's psychological testing, and one of the stories I read recently is they don't take people with high IQs. They have a range of IQ at which they're willing to take people, because they fear that people will get bored and maybe concoct bizarre situations like this. I don't know.
Hey, Rick, one thing I wanted to mention, by the way, and because I know the time limit, so I didn't want to interrupt here, but being a union guy, you've been a good supporter of the unions and things. Didn't you find it fascinating that it came down to collective bargaining that saved Brady?
Yeah.
The decision the quote was, should prove once and for all that the collective bargaining agreement does not grant the commissioner the authority to be unfair, arbitrary, and misleading. And that was the NFL Players Association. I just thought it was very fascinating.
Yeah, no, I thought that was fascinating, and a win for collective bargaining, and maybe good messaging for workers who get themselves into situations, or maybe something that you would take to your own job.
Yes, I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, interesting stuff. But again, this is the power of having that voice.
Yes,
yeah.
Sir.
So thank you for pointing that out. Good stuff.
Yes.
But Bob, I appreciate you taking a little time for us, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you for having me on.
All righty, Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
Meet Scott Walker, corporate whore. The Wisconsin governor says he should be America's president because he's a proven budget whacker who, by gollies, has dressed down teachers, slashed funding for higher education, busted unions, and gone after welfare recipients. He's the Koch brothers' favorite because he's tough on government moochers, unless, of course, you're a corporate moocher. If a corporation wants public money, well, then Walker's your go-to Wisconsin whore. Wesley Edens could vouch for the governor's willingness to bestow public favors on big men with big money. Edens is a New York City hedge fund gazillionaire who bought the Milwaukee Bucks pro basketball team last year. Showing the usual ethical perversity that afflicts private enterprise sports owners, this flim-flamming carpetbagger immediately demanded a $250 million subsidy from Wisconsin and Milwaukee taxpayers to build a sparkling new sports palace for him. Oh, golly, Scott squealed with unseemly delight. It would be my exquisite pleasure to ramrod the deal through my Republican legislature for you. And I'll also schmooze secretly with Democratic officials of Milwaukee County to get them to put out for you. Edens did his part to consummate this back alley affair by doling out ownership shares of his basketball team to prominent Republicans, including John Hams, a developer who just happens to be co-chairman of the National Finance Committee for Walker's presidential run. This is Jim Hightower saying, sure enough, in mid-August, the beady-eyed governor signed this $250 million giveaway of public money into law. Compounding his sleaziness is the fact that only 1 month earlier, Walker had slashed $250 million from the budget of the University of Wisconsin. So, if you're keeping score on Scott, corporations get the gold mine, students get the shaft.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. Unions representing at least 150 million workers have begun a 2-day national strike in India. Only a portion of that total actually participated, but tens of millions did walk off the job in sectors as diverse as banking, mining, and transportation. The target of their frustrations are major market reforms being pursued by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's finding it difficult to overhaul an unwieldy economy, albeit one with high growth potential. A large-scale privatization of industry remains on the table, as does a reduction in the number of national labor laws from 44 to just 4. In another proposal, corporations with less than 300 workers would no longer need government permission to initiate layoffs.
It's an illusion for members of Congress to think that they can vote this plan down and then turn around and still persuade countries like China, Japan, South Korea, Turkey, India, Iran's major oil customers. They ought to continue supporting the sanctions that are costing them billions of dollars every year. It's not going to happen.
Secretary of State John Kerry there, delivering part of the Obama administration's closing argument in support of the Iranian nuclear deal before a congressional vote next week. And the administration scored a major victory today as the 34th senator announced support for the deal. That pledge came from Maryland Democrat Barbara Mikulski and delivers Obama a firewall of support should Congress pass a bill against the deal and the president need to sustain a veto. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
These are words you should have told the truth. You're lying and traitor, and now we got the proof. Where you gonna run to? Where you gonna hide? You wanna put a door down? No one's getting out alive.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Bob Ney stole my last story of the day, which was all of my football fan friends are just gleaming with joy over Tom Brady being victorious in this case, and Deflategate, if you remember. I remember going, I really don't care. I don't. What it says to me is the league should be in charge of who handles the balls. That probably is the wrong way to put that. But the league should be in charge of that stuff. It shouldn't be up to the individual teams, which is just kind of one of those situations where you're kind of putting yourself in a position where, some shenanigans could happen. But the federal judge, U.S. District Judge Richard M. Berman, he erased the 4-game suspension and all of the controversy that goes with it. Now, he only had 2 options. The option was to chuck the 4-game suspension or uphold it. He didn't have an option to, give some type of lesser. There was no compromise in the middle saying 4 games is too much. So it was an either or, and the decision was to chuck the whole thing. Now, the NFL claimed that Brady and whoever deflated the balls ruined the integrity of the game. I don't know. All right. Okay, if that's what you think. But Brady or Berman had to uphold the 4-game suspension to throw it out. As I said, the NFL Players Association did have a really interesting statement, as Bob alluded to. They said this decision should prove once and for all that our collective bargaining agreement does not grant this commissioner the authority to be unfair, arbitrary, and misleading. It went on to say, while the CBA grants the person who occupies the position of commissioner the ability to judiciously and fairly exercise the designated powers of that position, the union did not agree to the attempts to unfairly, illegally exercise that power, contrary to what the NFL has repeatedly and wrongfully claimed. This is what's known as having someone on your side. And I suggest every working person in the country should have the same kind of protections. Nothing should be arbitrary. Nothing should be unfair or misleading or any of those other things. If you do something wrong, you should be held accountable for it, but you should have the due process. Just kind of my thoughts, and that's the way I see it. But there you go. September 10th, Brady will appear in the season opener against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I don't know who I want to lose more, Pretty simple stuff. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go. And as always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for being here. Look forward to seeing you again right here. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.